It was approaching the end of summer, and my friends and I wanted to do some cool, mischievous things before going back to school. So, we had the genius idea one night to sneak into a nearby community pool. It was actually only a couple blocks away. It's right smack in the middle of a residential area, so instead of sitting on a main road or something, it actually just sat around a bunch of houses on a quiet road. During a hot day, the little parking lot would be full and the spot would be bustling. But at 1 in the morning, the place was of course dead. There's obviously a big fence surrounding the whole front entrance, as well as a cage that gets closed up when the place closes, so our best way was to get in through the side. We snuck into the backyard of a neighboring house and hopped the fence over to the pool. It was as easy as that. The 4 of us took off our shirts and jumped into the pool, which in retrospect wasn't smart, since any of the neighbors could have heard the splashes and just called the police. But we were dumb high schoolers. It was very, very dark within that whole enclosing. This pool had no lights, which is why it closed at sunset. James, Courtney, and Alyssa were on the other side of the pool, as I was just kind of doing my own thing at first, swimming around and getting my face wet. I saw Alyssa get out of the pool shortly after and run away. I swam over to see what was going on. She was just going to the water fountain though. The 3 of us just bopped around in the water for a bit, and eventually we heard Alyssa jump back into the pool from the other side. It was too dark to see much more than her black hair covering her face. But just then we heard Alyssa playfully call something to us as she was walking back to the pool. The 3 of us in the pool looked at each other. I know they were doing the same thing as me, counting heads. There were 3 of us on this side of the pool, and here came Alyssa walking over to our side. So who was that on the other side? Alyssa got in, but the 3 of us were distracted, looking at the head bopping around the water across the pool. James said across the pool, "Who is that?" Not even 2 seconds later, the head went underwater and disappeared from view. We took this time to whisper to each other, mostly things like, what should we do? What if that's security? And should we run? Suddenly I felt something grab my leg with force and tried pulling me down into the water. I kicked, splashed, and yelled for help. James came over to pull me out of the pool, while the girls were already running for it, screaming. It wasn't until I got to the stairs of the pool that the grip on my leg was released and I was free. We hopped the same fence we climbed over to get in and ran all the way back to Alyssa's house. I was convinced that whoever that was a security guard. That is, until they literally tried to pull me under the water. We don't know what to think. There are a few possibilities. Maybe it was just another kid messing with us, maybe it was a security guard who went way too far, or most likely, it was a dangerous person who had ill intent. It was an ordinary day like any other. 85 degrees out, family getting ready to jump in the pool. I was looking for my 6-year-old brother so I could help him into the pool, but I thought I'd just wait for him in the pool instead. My parents were still inside while I got ready to jump in the pool, but I didn't, because I saw something dark sitting at the bottom of the pool. It took me a few seconds to realize it was my little 6-year-old brother at the bottom of the pool. It took my young brain a few moments to realize he wasn't playing around. I screamed in such a loud and high pitch you would think it was a little girl if you heard it. I remember the feeling of my skin crawling as my helpless 8-year-old self didn't know what to do. My parents burst out the back door. My dad dove into the pool and grabbed my little brother from the bottom. It was nothing short of a miracle that my dad managed to resuscitate him though. Thereon after, we weren't allowed back into the pool unsupervised until we were both at least 10 years old. I remember waking up from a deep sleep and looking at the clock, seeing it was around 2 in the morning, when I heard splashes coming from my pool in the backyard. My bedroom window didn't have a view of the pool, so I had to run downstairs to the den to get a view. And let me tell you, I was freaking out on my way down there, especially given that I live alone. The blind was shut, but the windows were open, and I could still hear a little splashing coming from the pool. I had to be quiet opening the blinds, otherwise I risked exposing myself. I lifted the blinds only enough to get a view of the pool, but the splashing stopped. I waited a few minutes before deciding it was safe to go outside. I walked up to the pool and nearly had a heart attack when I saw a body submerged underwater on the shallow end. I pulled the body out of the water, hoping it was more than just a body still, but he didn't seem to be breathing. I looked around my yard in a panic, and by an off chance, caught a glimpse of somebody standing in my bushes. I ran back inside of my house and called 911. The police arrived surprisingly quickly and followed me to the backyard to find nothing but an empty pool. The body was gone, and so was the person standing in my bushes. This happened when we were staying in a small country inn. It was a family trip to some distant resort where our extended family would be meeting us. It was such a long drive, however, that we needed to stop for the night. The inn was across the street from some big fruit stand and some crops. Other than that, it was thick forest in every direction. There were a couple other cars parked in the parking lot, so we weren't the only ones. We arrived there after eating dinner at some small diner, so the day was basically over. The sun had set, but it was still early and we didn't know what to do, so we decided to hop in the pool that the inn surprisingly had. There was no one around to stop us, so as far as we knew, it was allowed. We kind of just played typical pool games that we played ever since we were little kids, like Shark. We thought it being dark made it more fun, even though it was kind of creepy being surrounded by nothing but forest for miles. For whatever reason, I was peering over to the woods. There was a guy just standing by a couple trees. He didn't appear to be attempting to hide or anything. It was blatantly obvious he was glaring over to us. I did a little side head nod to my brother to let him know what I saw. He looked over and said, "Jesus Christ, that's creepy." The man then walked over to the poolside and took a seat on one of the lounge chairs. He just looked at us and said, "Wonderful night for a swim, huh?" And then a pretty off-putting chuckle. My brother and I did our little fake polite laughs and said yeah. Meanwhile, all that we were thinking was, alright, it's time to get out of the pool. But I guess we didn't want to make it obvious that we were leaving because of him. It was so painfully uncomfortable that my brother and I didn't even speak to each other. Then the man got up, still watching us, and walked over literally to the edge of the pool and just stood there looking down at us. Eventually I asked if he worked with the hotel, and he completely ignored my question. That's when things got really uncomfortable. I whispered to my brother we should go. As soon as we started moving towards the ladder, the man started walking fast over to the ladder, so we stopped and stayed in the pool. We played it off like nothing about it was weird, but my heart was racing, and I knew my brother's was too. The pool had stairs on one side as well, but as we tried to make our way over to them, the man seemed to inch his way to the stairs too. We were trapped in there, not knowing what he was planning, but by some stroke of luck, our dad appeared from behind the corner of the building, calling us to come out of the pool. We both screamed help and accused the man of trying to hurt us. Our dad, who was much taller than the man, sized him up, pushed him, yelled at him, and threatened to call the police. I remember the man didn't say anything in response. He just walked away slowly as my dad yelled curse words at him. His reaction to our dad alone suggested that he had intentions of doing something wrong, like God forbid kidnapping us. I'm going to share a very disturbing memory from my early years. My name is Daniel. When I was 6, maybe 7 years old, our family lived in New Jersey. Our old house was on a very quiet street. We had the same next-door neighbor living next to us for as long as I was alive. One hot day when it was just my dad home, The neighbor came over and introduced himself to me as Paul. He asked my dad if he could take me to his pool, and from what I remember, he seemed very genuine and nice. I guess that's why my dad let me go with him. I remember hopping around on the shallow end of his pool, and he swam in the deeper end, watching me the whole time, smiling. He asked me questions like where I go to school, what I do for fun, what shows do I like, and so on. He asked me if I knew how to swim, and I shook my head no. He swam over to me and started lifting my legs and arms, trying to show me how to swim. It didn't really work out, but he said he'd invite me over one night and keep helping me. Well, apparently one night was the next night. I heard splashes coming from the pool next door from my room as I was laying in bed. I opened the window and saw Paul looking up to my window, waving. He called up to my window to come on over with my bathing suit. Excited by the thought of it, I threw on my bathing suit and snuck out the front door. It's funny. I knew well enough that what I was doing would go against my parents, given that I knew to sneak out. That night as we were in the pool together, Paul was extra touchy as he was supposedly showing me how to swim. But at the same time, I didn't realize what was going on. Suddenly I heard the shout of my dad from my window, and less than half a minute later my dad was in Paul's backyard, yelling at him, threatening to get a restraining order if he ever came near me again. My parents had me describe what Paul did to me, and I said nothing, because that's truthfully what I believed. They told me to never speak to Paul again, and pretty soon started looking for a new house. In the meantime, however, one night out of curiosity, I sat up from my bed and looked out the window. There was Paul, standing in his pool, looking up at my window, waving me over once again, but also putting his finger on his lips, meaning to be quiet. I shut the blinds and ignored him, listening to my parents. A few nights later, around the same time, there was a knock at the window. Or at least I thought it was a knock at first. It just sounded like a loud thump. Then there was another one. I opened my window and saw Paul down below in our backyard. He spoke up to me in a soft voice, asking me to sneak down and we'll hang out inside his house. I shut the window and went straight to my parents' room and told them. My mom screamed at my dad to go break Paul's neck. My mom held me in her arms as she got on the phone with the police. Meanwhile, we both heard my dad yelling incomprehensible things outside. Paul was arrested for attempting to lure a child. I don't know much else about what happened though, because the next day, my mom and I stayed with my grandma until we moved to a new house. I never really talk about this with my parents, only because it's very uncomfortable to talk about. And it's also just a painful memory. I live in Dorset, Vermont. It's a very secluded, mountainous place. There's lots of trails on the mountain that I like to walk or jog down commonly. In fact, I'm able to cut through the woods in my yard to get to a trail that I walk and run down all the time. One day after getting home from work, I changed out of my work clothes and into my running clothes. By 6:45, I was ready to get on the trail. On this particular day, I took along my coonhound, Murphy. We did 5 minutes of walking. Then we started with a slow jog. Murphy is always a joy to walk because she doesn't pull. She always just stays calm at my side. The trail is wide enough for her to always stay by my side, maintaining my speed. I was always looking up when I ran, which is why I didn't notice that Murphy stopped in her tracks until I felt the leash pull her neck, at which point I stopped and looked back at her to see what was wrong. She was looking behind us, and her ears did that little bouncing thing that hound dogs' ears do when they hear something. I mean, we were in the middle of the forest, so there was any number of things she could have heard, anything from a deer to a squirrel to another person on the trail. I tried to pull her forward to continue our run, but she seemed persistent and reluctant to move forward. I played along for a few moments to let her see that she was curious over nothing. But it wasn't nothing, because I finally saw what she was looking at. There was a man back down the trail in the direction we came from. He was clearly not hiding the fact that he was looking at Murphy and I. I waved at him to try and be friendly, and then looked down at Murphy as I pulled her and told her to come. She finally budged and started running by my side again, not without looking back twice at the man. It's happened before though. People on these small trails would commonly wait for me to move ahead so they could avoid passing the dog. Usually they'd be out earlier in the day though. At this point it was on the darker side, and usually there wouldn't be other people out. I also didn't notice if the man waved back or not because I looked down at Murphy after waving. But at that moment, I still thought everything was normal. That is until maybe a minute later when Murphy stopped me again. This time she looked ahead of us and started barking. I saw who she was looking at right away this time. It was another man walking slowly towards us. I waved to him too, but he didn't wave back. I was standing still, holding Murphy close, expecting the man to eventually pass me, but the closer he got, the slower he went. When he got within hearing range, I told him that Murphy's friendly and that he could pass. Now here's when I knew something was up. After I said this, the man maintained eye contact with me, keeping his straight face as he very slowly continued approaching us. Then I noticed Murphy turn around and start barking in the other direction, behind us. I turned and almost had a heart attack when I saw that man from earlier, maybe 5 feet away from us, slowly approaching as well. I knew now something bad was about to go down. There were only a few seconds between that moment and the moment I felt 2 arms reach around me from behind. Then the first man I saw earlier started full-on charging me. Murphy's barks turned to aggressive growling and rabid dog-like barks. Then one of the men screamed as apparently Murphy bit him in the leg and wouldn't let go. This forced the man to release his grip on me, giving me a chance to tackle the other man to the ground. It took a little force to get Murphy to release her grip from the man's leg, but when she did, we ran back down the trail. The man who I tackled didn't try fighting back after his friend got bitten. I think he realized they were outmatched at that point, but I was still not sticking around to find out what their intentions were. We got back to the house in 5 minutes, only because we sprinted back. I checked Murphy to make sure she wasn't hurt or wounded at all by the man she bit. She was fine. I couldn't be more grateful for her. She's still alive and well. She's 9 years old. I still see it as a blessing in disguise that one of the few times I decided to take Murphy along with me was the same night I ran into those 2 men in the forest. My pit bull Callie sleeps in my room with me. I have a loft bedroom, meaning it's a higher level in the house than the rest of the rooms. My room also has a very large closet elevated off the ground. I keep a little stepping stool to get into it. It's mainly just a bunch of childhood toys stored in there though. One night I woke up to growling. I sat up and saw Callie standing in the middle of the room. She was looking up at the closet. Needless to say, as a 14-year-old, that scared the shit out of me to even imagine what she could have been growling at. I called her up to my bed so I could pet her and calm her down. She licked her lips and stopped growling, now looking at me. I turned to give another look at the closet door in the dark. She stopped growling now though, so I figured it was just her doggy imagination running wild. I went back to sleep pretty easily, now with Callie in the bed with me. I woke up again, God knows how many hours later, now to Callie's barking. She was in the center of the room again, looking up at the closet. I told her to shut up, and after she looked at me in silence, I heard a jar of Legos spill inside the closet. Callie started going crazy now, barking, trying to jump up the stepladder, clawing at the wall. I heard my bedroom door open and my dad came up the stairs screaming, "What the hell is going on?" I told him to check the closet, there's someone in there. He ran past Callie, up the stepladder, and pulled the door open. The second he opened that door, someone dressed in jeans, a black pullover hoodie, and black beanie pushed my dad off the step stool, causing him to fall on his back. The man in the black hoodie then took off, leaving my room down the stairs. However, Callie took off after him. I heard the 2 of them rushing down the stairs, but it sounded like Callie caught him because the man let out a scream of pain. My dad and I went down to the living room to see Callie with her teeth sunk into the man's arm. Blood was spilled all over the carpet. Apparently, Callie bit the man in the leg and the arm. My dad got Callie off of him and told me to take her back to my room while he called the cops. The man was moaning in pain up until the cops calmly entered the house, looked down at the man, and they picked him up together. They brought him outside, where an ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. He was taken away in the ambulance. The next few days, my dad spent talking to lawyers and whatnot in order to sue the man for breaking and entering. He ended up winning the case, obviously. He never told me how much money he got, but he sure did make it known just how much Callie saved the day for our family. The first dog I ever got was back in 1992, when I was 10 years old. My parents finally agreed to let me get my German Shepherd, my lifelong favorite dog. Only thing, they made me walk him twice a day as the one condition to owning him, once in the afternoon and once at night. His name was Calvin. This happened on a snowy December night. I begged my dad to let me just let Calvin in the yard, but he insisted I walk him, he always did, and walking him twice a day quickly became a huge chore. I threw on my snow boots, a sweatshirt, and then a jacket over that, and finally my snow hat. I was ready for the cold snowstorm. We set out into the neighborhood streets, Calvin pulling ahead as usual. There were no cars on the road at all on this night. There was simply way too much snow. We walked down the edge of the neighborhood by the woods. I remember wanting to see if the roads had been plowed anywhere yet. We came to an intersection between two very quiet roads by the woods at the edge of the neighborhood. That's where I ran into him. I heard the sound of footsteps crushing the snow behind me. Calvin turned first and barked a couple times. It was a man bundled up in snow gear. He had a scarf covering half his face, so all I could really see were his eyes. But I could still tell he was on the older side, 40 plus. His voice was muffled through his scarf as he called to me in a friendly voice. Then he did something unexpected. He picked up some snow, patted it into a snowball, and seemingly playfully threw it at me. I dodged it, now not knowing how to react. He came closer and started to pet Calvin. I was pretty uncomfortable, to be honest. The man stood back up after petting Calvin, then put his shoulder on me and said I shouldn't be alone out here on a night like this. I think I remember telling him I wasn't. I was with my dog. There were some more words exchanged. I don't remember what, but I do remember eventually walking away from that man without saying bye. Even though I didn't look back, Calvin kept looking back, and I slightly heard footsteps in the snow behind me again, so I knew he was following me. I figured he was following me home, which is why I was caught off guard when I heard the footsteps behind us increase in speed and intensity, causing Calvin to turn and start barking. The man grabbed me with one arm and covered my mouth with his other arm. I think Calvin started biting him, but he was wearing so many layers that he was able to ignore the pain, but only for so long. The man finally let go of his grip on me and aimed his attention at Calvin by kicking at him over and over. Eventually the man gave up and took off for the woods. Calvin pulled so hard after him his leash snapped off the collar, and off Calvin dashed, disappearing into the woods. I heard his barks fade away into the darkness as I screamed his name over and over. I returned home crying, telling my parents that Calvin was chasing after some man and that he was gone. I stayed up all night hoping he would return home. He never did. Calvin was my first dog, and losing him was my first real heartbreak. I like to think he was found and brought to a shelter somewhere, because I wholeheartedly believe that dog saved my life. I live on a farm in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It's just my wife and our infant son living there. Oh, and of course my Rottweiler, Jesse. We have Jesse sleep outside in his doggy house from the months of May to October. It serves as an extra form of protection and intimidation to potential burglars, but also allows for him to do his business freely without having to wake one of us up. Jesse always has a mount attached to his collar that connects to the doggy house so that he can't run away or get lost. Very seldom at night we hear Jesse barking, and given that he's a guard dog, he's trained to bark at suspicious people, so I always go out and check when we hear him barking. But again, it's very, very seldom. I'm gonna skip the fluff and get right to the night that my wife and I woke up at like 1:30 a.m. to Jesse's barks outside. I told my wife, who was also sitting up with me, to wait in the bed. I'll go have a look. I slipped on my shoes and went outside in my robe. Jesse took notice to me for a second, but resumed barking in the direction of our crops. I had to go back inside for a flashlight and Jesse's leash, because I planned on going in the crops with him. After clipping Jesse's leash onto his collar, he knew right away to take a lead. He led me into the crops. I had the flashlight on, but given the basic nature of a cornfield, I didn't really see much in front of me besides crops in my face, regardless of the light. Jesse stopped barking, but he was still pulling me through the crops, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Then, out of nowhere, he stopped sniffing and just stopped. He looked up, but I didn't know if he heard something, if he was looking at something, or if he was just lost. The two of us stood in silence right there for a little bit. I heard crops in the near distance being brushed around suddenly. Jesse's head was all over the place. He was looking left, then right, then left again, as if he were hearing sounds coming from everywhere. He started barking and pulling again, but this time I yanked him back to stay put. I swallowed and took a deep breath before calling out into the night that this was a private property and anyone caught trespassing would be brought to jail. It took more bravery calling that out than you may think. And of course I was going to yell out a threat like that. What else could I say? The situation felt so surreal. And then... it was the scream of a woman, a distressed, manic, deranged kind of scream. Jesse started pulling in the direction of the screams, but the more we ran, the further the screams seemed to get, until they completely stopped. Then Jesse once again stopped running and started looking around in different directions. Suddenly, there was the sound of someone zooming past us, rushing through the crops. In fact, they were so close I could see some of the crops maybe 5 feet from my face being brushed aside. This time, I let Jesse off the leash. I told him to go, catch them. Jesse disappeared in seconds. I heard his barks, though. He was getting further away with every passing second, until I was sitting in the middle of the crops alone, shaking in fear. I was so scared, I didn't even want to move in fear of making noise and giving away my position. I was as scared as a young child. Then, the most horrific thing to ever happen to me happened. A couple crops were brushed aside behind me, and something grabbed my right shoulder. I don't mean a friendly, light tap on the shoulder. I mean something grabbed my shoulder tight and squeezed to the point of it hurting. I screamed, and without looking back, ran in the direction I was 90% sure led back to the house. On my way back, I could hear Jesse's barks in the far distance. I wasn't about to go looking for him, though. I thanked God when I saw the roof of my house come into view in the distance, and I finally reached the edge of the cornfield onto the back lawn. I passed the big oak tree in the yard and Jesse's doghouse and went straight through the back door. I checked every door and every window to make sure they were locked. I told my wife as little as I could to prevent a freakout, but I did tell her there was someone, maybe even more than one person in the crops. We called the sheriff's office and waited up for a while, making sure no one came to either door, and in hopes that Jesse would come back. And thank our lucky stars, he did. When a deputy finally pulled up the dirt road to our farm an hour later, he found Jesse sitting on the back deck of the house. There wasn't much the deputy could do other than take down my description of what happened. He said it himself, he wasn't about to go searching around that cornfield. We let Jesse sleep inside for the next few nights for his own safety, and after almost a week of uneventfulness, things went back to normal. There hasn't been a similar incident since. When I was 17 in my last year of high school, I was finally starting to hit things off with a girl I liked. I'll call her Lynn. Lynn was a big pot smoker. At the time it really wasn't my thing, but I went along with it just because. I live a couple blocks from her, so I always walked before I got a car. Across the street from her house is a park. Commonly at night she'd instant message me on AOL to come hang out at the park. Sometimes we'd just sit on the playground at night and talk for hours. Sometimes she'd convince me to smoke with her. It was always such a private place to hang out and talk, especially at night. A line of thick trees surrounded the playground as well, creating a wall of sorts. Well, one night we both snuck out around 12 and met at the playground in the park. We talked for a while. Then Lynn perked up, playfully hit me on the shoulder, and said we should play hide and seek. It may sound immature for a couple seniors in high school to play hide and seek, but it just seemed like it would be fun. She told me to go to the trees and count to 30. When I was done, my first instinct was of course to check the playground, and if she wasn't there, I'd move on to the picnic bench area. We always had flashlights on us when we went to the park, because this was before everyone had phones with flashlights in their pockets. I stepped from the grass onto the wood fiber mulch surrounding the playground. I aimed my flashlight up to the playground, because I guess I was too lazy to go up there if I didn't have to. You know those big plastic circular things with a bunch of tiny holes in it that a lot of playgrounds have? Maybe not, but there was one of those things up at the highest level of the playground, and through a bunch of holes, I could see what appeared to be skin and a jacket, but what stood out the most was her eye peering through one of the holes. Instead of going up there right away, I decided it would be fun to kind of mess with her. I waved the flashlight around the playground, pretending like I didn't see her. I was going to walk to the picnic area, turn on the flashlight, walk around to the trees, back to the playground, sneak up on her, and scare the living daylight out of her. Don't ask me why, I just wanted to. I walked to the picnic area, shut off the flashlight, and snuck back over to the playground. I was careful not to make noise as I crept through the wood chips that the playground sat on. Before I could even step foot on the first platform of the playground, something grabbed my arm and pulled me. I actually screamed, but stopped when I heard Lynn's laughter. I turned on the flashlight and was relieved to see it was her. The prank obviously backfired completely. After that, we went back up to the second level platform of the playground that we always chilled in. I asked her if she knew that I saw her behind that plastic thing at the top of the playground, but she was confused. She acted as if she never went up there. I explained to her that I saw someone up there. We both looked up as the tiny creaking sounds we had been hearing every so often suddenly made a disturbing amount of sense. I aimed the light up there, which revealed someone's head hunched over the railing of the platform above us. At the same time, we heard footsteps kicking the wood chips around right below the platform we were sitting on. I made the first move for us to run, and Lynn followed suit. I turned out my flashlight while we ran, which wasn't long since Lynn's house was right across the street. We went to her room, shut the curtains, and I stayed there for the night, not wanting to go home. That marked the end of our late night visits to the park. Do you have any memories from when you were a little kid that just make you uncomfortable to think about? Especially since you were so young at the time that you didn't know any better? Well, this is mine. My mom used to take me to this really big playground in my town. And when I say really big, I'm not exaggerating. It was probably the biggest playground you'd ever see. If only I knew the name of it. The playground was entirely wooden, and every Saturday and Sunday there would be at least 50 kids playing across it, with the parents all tucked away in the shaded area reading their magazines and whatnot. One typical busy day at the playground, I was running along a big open platform when an older woman stopped me and said hi. She kept going on and on about how cute I was, and how she loved my blonde hair. It started to seem like she knew me based off the way she was talking to me. And then she told me that my mom left and that she told her to take me home. Keep in mind I was only 6, so I believed her. The woman took me to the parking lot, to an old station wagon where a man, I now presume to be her husband, was sitting in the driver's seat. He acted all friendly to me as the woman motioned me into the back seat, but I remember him yelling and lecturing at her about something. The man drove very aggressively and quickly as he was leaving the parking lot. We came to the light at the exit of the park. It was red. Just then, a car pulled up behind us and laid on the horn. I looked behind us, and it was my mom's car. The man blew through the red light, which even I picked up on, and started flooring it down the streets. I started to cry and scream as I realized my mom didn't know these people. Not long after, the man pulled the car over and yelled at the top of his lungs at me to get out of the car. I opened the door, still crying my eyes out in fear. My mom pulled up next to me, ran out of the car, and hugged me. In the heat of the moment, she didn't get the tag number, nor was she able to call the police since this was 2001 and there were no cell phones. I really wish I didn't remember this day so clearly. I would have rather it just been one of those memories that the brain chooses to repress. I'm a single father currently living with my 5-year-old son. I have an old wooden playground in my backyard. It has a tire swing, monkey bars, and a big slide. A couple times recently, I've heard noises coming from the playground at night. I'll start from the first night. I woke up one night last week to the sound of something squeaking from outside. I recognized it to be the sound of the rusty chain of the tire swing spinning around. I also heard a young child's laughter out there. I thought it was my son, so I went to his room to find him in his bed, fast asleep. My heart dropped as I saw him in his bed. That meant some stranger was in my yard. But when I opened the back door to the backyard, there was no one back there. The tire swing was spinning slowly, however, as if somebody had just gotten off of it. I chalked it up as some kid just sneaking into my yard and went back to sleep. The next night, however, I woke up again to the sound of someone stomping up and down the slide, once again accompanied by the sound of a child's laughter. I checked my son's room once again to find him in bed. This time I thought I'd be a little smarter about it and check the window first before going outside. Nothing was out there though. Not on the playground at least. I still went outside anyway just to make sure. For a couple nights nothing happened and I completely forgot about it. But on the third night, while in bed, a knock at my window startled me. I sat up in shock for a good minute, afraid to look outside, but eventually I was brave enough to do so. I looked out the foggy window. Through the smudge, I could see both the swings on the swing set swinging lightly, accompanied with the laughter of a child again. I ran as fast as I could down those stairs and out the back door, but instead of finding a couple of deviant little kids back there, instead I saw some towering figure looming at the top of my playground, surely looking at me. My courage turned to pure cowardice as I turned to run back inside, lock the door, and dial 911. The wait for an officer to arrive was the longest 20 minutes I'd ever experienced. By the time they got there, though, the figure on the playground was gone. They took down what little information I could give them and left. I wish I could say that was the last occurrence, but just last night, there was another knock at my window. I simply ignored it this time, though. I'm dreading going to sleep tonight. I think I'm gonna install security cameras on my house soon. Either way, I'll give an update on what happens. I was 13 years old. My bedroom window faced the playground outside. It was a hot spring night with a light rain, so I had the window open, allowing me to hear the raindrops, as well as a strange squeaking sound. It really started to get annoying, so I went to the window to see what it could be. There was someone sitting on the swing set. I nearly screamed, but covered my mouth instead. What was really scary was that the swing was in the direct line of sight from my window, and the person on the swing was staring straight at my window. I could only hope they didn't see me. I was too scared to go across the house to my parents' room. Instead, all I really wanted to do was hide in my bed and hope they would go away, but the squeaking went on and on. I covered my ears not only because I was scared, but also because of the annoyance of the sound. And finally, at last, the squeaking stopped. I gave it a few seconds before I quietly got out from bed and went back to the window. This time, I actually screamed. The person who was previously on the swing was now standing at most 10 feet from my window, looking in, close enough for me to make out his horrid face, with his eyes locked onto mine, but only for maybe a second or two, because I went straight to my parents' room, screaming for my dad the whole way. My dad looked out the window, then went outside. He came back in 5 minutes later and said there were boot marks under the swings where a patch of mud accumulated, but he couldn't find the person who made them. This was 100% the scariest moment of my life. I'm currently in a predicament, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor Charlie, or Charles as we call him, informed us of his 14-year-old son's disappearance. He reported it to the police, it was on the news, it was everywhere. Me and my wife felt absolutely awful and always offered to help them out in any way we could. As the years passed with no word of their son, we assumed they eventually came to terms with it, and realized the worst had probably happened. Me and my wife never had the nerve to ask if the body ever turned up. Occasionally Charles and his wife would invite me and my wife over for a barbecue during the warmer months. We noticed neither of the two were ever the same since their son had gone missing. Charles' wife Kathy was always quieter and more reserved, and Charles just seemed more awkward and nervous, both understandable to a certain extent. Fast forward a couple of years later to just last week. Charles came over to me when I was taking out the garbage and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to get him my best shovel, not asking why he needed it. He thanked me and said he just had to do some work in his backyard and he'd get it back to me by tomorrow. He then disappeared into his backyard. I went inside, and when I was by one of my upstairs windows that has a clear view into Charlie's backyard, I could see he was digging out a really big hole in the ground. He seemed to be struggling a bit. He's 56 after all. I figured I'd go grab my second shovel and help him out. As I entered his backyard and called his name, he looked up from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and hurried over to me, saying, No, it's okay, Tim, I got it. Please, just leave." I said, "What's wrong with you? It's not a big deal." Mainly because of his bizarre reaction. He told me I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard, and then pointed to the gate as if I were a dog. I was so taken aback by how he was acting that I just left without saying another word. I went upstairs to spy on him through the window. He was digging the hole for at least another half hour. When it finally looked like he was done, he started looking around, like up high at neighboring houses as if to check and make sure nobody was watching. And then, before I could think to hide, he spotted me at my window. All I could do at that point was casually walk away. He's up to something, and I wanted to find out what. I continued to look at his backyard every so often, but he wasn't digging anymore. I figured he knew I was watching now and would wait until it was dark out. And I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt outside. It was too dark to see anything from my window now, so I snuck outside quietly and looked over the fence in the backyard. I could see him digging loud and clear now. When he went inside his house, I took that opportunity to sneak into his backyard and take a look at what was in the hole he was digging. The moonlight alone revealed a small piece of a black garbage bag protruding from the dirt at the bottom of the hole. I looked at his back door and back at the hole. I did this 3 more times, deciding whether or not to see what was in the bag. In the end, I decided to run back to my backyard, and it was a good thing I did because he came back outside seconds later. But he wasn't digging. In fact, he disappeared to the other side of his house and didn't come back. I went back into my house and quietly got back into bed, trying not to wake up my wife. The next day, the first thing I did was look out my window to see that the hole in the ground was completely patched up in Charles' backyard. I also noticed that his SUV was parked in the street now instead of his driveway. I don't know what happened throughout the rest of that night, but I'm disturbed to think that what was at the bottom of that hole might have been his son's body. For all I know, he dug up that hole to remove whatever he had previously buried down there and drive it somewhere else to dump it. This is all speculation, call me crazy if you want. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife. And quite frankly, I don't know what to do. Charles never gave me back my shovel. I'm not going to ask him for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since. And something disturbing happened yesterday. I by coincidence happened to look out my window across to Charlie's house and caught him standing at one of his windows looking into mine. When he saw me, he shut his blinds, and that was in the middle of the day. I have no idea what to do, but I'm honestly terrified. I've lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 with my family and my current house by myself. We lived in the first house for the first 15 years of my life, and the second house the next 7 before I moved out to my current home. This experience happened in my first home when I was 15, within the last few months of my family living in that house. I don't remember my family ever being really friendly with the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 kids living next door with their dad that me and my brother had only talked to maybe once or twice our entire lives. As bizarre as that is, though we did know both of their names, Eric and Todd. One day, me and my brother, who is 5 years younger than me, were outside playing basketball in the driveway. That was when one of the 2 boys next door, Todd, came outside and walked over to us, initiating a conversation. I don't remember what we said to each other quote for quote, but I remember the first thing that he asked us was if it was true that we were moving. As the older brother, I did most, if not all, of the talking. Todd was probably the same age as me. I never actually asked. By the end of the conversation, he invited me to come with he and his brother to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road the next day. I agreed since it was the weekend and I didn't have anything going on anyway. My little brother asked if he could come at the last second, not under the assumption that he was automatically invited as well. Todd said yeah and then walked away. Late the next day, around an hour before dusk, Eric and Todd rang the doorbell. We were quick to answer the door because our parents didn't know that we were going out to shoot BB guns. Walking down the sidewalks with Todd and Eric decked out in camo gear and carrying a duffel bag of BB guns was really strange. The level of seriousness these 2 clearly had in this was really weird to me and my brother, and we kept meeting eyes, holding in our laughter a couple of times because of it. We got to the woods having spoken very few words. I could already tell these 2 were kids of few words. Maybe why we hadn't met them officially until that point. Todd dropped the duffel bag onto the ground and unzipped it, while Eric aggressively snapped a branch off a tree and threw it into the river. Me and my brother looked at each other again, this time not finding it as funny. Todd pulled out a couple of guns and handed them to me and my brother, and that's when Todd dropped the bomb and told us they were real guns. Eric grabbed a loaded gun from the bag and began firing at trees across the river. When I realized he wasn't joking about the guns being real, I was in a mix of anger and confusion. I grabbed the gun from my brother's hands and placed both of them back in the bag. I told them we weren't comfortable with this and had to leave. Eric stopped firing, and they both looked at us with expressions that seemed half angry. One of the 2 boys yelled a curse word at us as we were walking away. I always had a feeling these 2 were bad kids, but this confirmed it. I told my brother not to speak to them anymore for the remainder of our time living there. We told our parents at the dinner table that night that they were really weird kids, but we didn't mention the gun thing. I woke up that night to a breeze of cold air hitting me in the face. My window was open all the way. I felt something hard press up against the back of my head as I was looking out the window, and somebody behind me going, "Shh, shh." Somehow I didn't scream or jump, I just stayed calm. I was able to understand what was going on surprisingly quickly. I heard Todd's voice in a whisper behind my head. He told me if I ever told anybody, especially his dad, about the guns or the visit, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I replied in a quiet, shaky voice, "Okay." He pushed my head with his gun before leaving through my window. Every night thereafter for months, I would catch either Todd or Eric at a certain window of their house, looking into either my or my brother's room. Their behavior became more and more strange as we got closer to the date of our move. Just a week before we moved, a rock was thrown at my window one night at like 1 a.m. I opened my window and saw Todd aiming a pistol up at the window, and feeling like I was about to die, I dove for the ground, only to hear the two boys crack up in laughter. I heard one of them refer to me as a fucking retard. There were 2 other instances that week where the two would harass either me or my brother, and ultimately I couldn't think of a more perfect time for us to have moved and gotten out of there. After all these years, neither me nor my brother told anybody about the boys or their threats. All I know is those 2 boys were trouble, and it was a good thing we got out of there when we did. At the time I'm writing this happened 2 weeks ago. I've always hated just about all of my neighbors. I'm fresh out of college and I'm living on my own, but that comes at a price. I'm living in a really shitty area, the only place I can afford a house. So I'm not bound to have the ideal neighbors. The neighbors on one side always have their music blasting, while the neighbors on the other side are the creepiest people I've ever met in my life. It's 2 people living next door. One woman in her 60s who's not friendly at all and honestly doesn't seem all there, and a slightly younger woman who has some kind of severe mental disabilities. I have no idea what the relationship is between the 2. I would commonly be sitting on my front porch when I'd look over next door and see the older woman holding the younger woman back as she'd be having some kind of freak-out episode. She'd have her arms crossed and she'd quickly rock back and forth while screaming and making noises. Sometimes she'd even look over and point at me and mumble stuff to the other woman. It's quite disturbing, actually. Sometimes I even go inside when I get too uncomfortable. Anyway, it was a night like any other. I had to go to bed early for work in the morning. However, the next door neighbors were making an unusual amount of noise. I could hear the deranged woman screaming and throwing a fit as the older woman yelled in distress. This went on for about an hour and I couldn't take it anymore. I marched over to the house next door and banged on the door. The older woman answered and greeted me with a "What the hell do you want?" I asked as politely as I could to keep the noise down. In response, she raised her eyebrows and tilted her head down, clearly annoyed by my request. Just then, the younger woman entered the living room, screaming "How dare you!" repeatedly. The older woman held her back from approaching me, and then slammed the door in my face. I had no idea what just happened, but I felt like I didn't accomplish what I came there for. I walked back to my bed in defeat. However, I realized they had finally gone silent next door. I was able to get some sleep at last. Well, I woke up, feeling like the night went way too fast. I looked at my clock and saw that it was only 3 in the morning. My head fell back into the pillow in relief, but pretty soon, I thought I could hear something come from downstairs. I got out of my bed and went over to my door just to make sure I wasn't hearing things. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I went back to bed. I woke up once again to a dark room. Only 20 minutes had passed since I'd fallen back asleep. I didn't know what could have woken me up, though. And then I heard. I panicked and tried to find my phone on my bedside desk as a source of light, but when I found it, I didn't dare turn the light on. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to find some kind of dark figure in the room. I looked at every corner of the room, and even though it was so dark, I could tell there wasn't anybody standing there. This time I heard where it was coming from. I turned to the edge of my bed and saw a black shadowy circle-like object right at the edge of the wooden wall of my bed. When the light of my phone revealed that black object to be the face of the deranged woman from next door, she screamed like the lunatic she was. She screamed as if she were a vampire in the light. I screamed as well. I screamed as I clumsily ran for the door and tripped halfway, looking back to see the woman following me. I slammed the bedroom door behind me and ran all the way downstairs, where I locked the door leading to the upstairs. I called the cops as the woman pounded on the door, screaming incomprehensible things. When the cops showed up, I told them the woman lives next door and that she was mentally insane. The older woman from next door came over after hearing all the commotion and spoke with the cops, pleading with them to let her go, but they insisted they had to take her in for at least the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges, and as he asked this, the older woman gave me the most evil, hateful stare imaginable. I chose not to press charges, but her stare didn't change. The officers drove the ill woman away, while the older woman continued to stare at me as she walked back to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her get in her car and drive away. These two still live next to me. I'm seriously considering moving out because the creepy woman next door makes it clear she despises me, and I've concluded that the mentally ill woman is not only terrifying, but dangerous as well. A lot of you guys wanted a part 2 to the clown stories, so I figured with all the clown stuff still going on, this would be the best time to do one more of these. Three days ago, I had an encounter with one of those crazy clowns that everyone's hearing about lately. Most people are running into them on the road in the safety of their cars. I, however, had a much more disturbing encounter. I live in Massachusetts. My property is enclosed by trees with a long, winding driveway leading to the road. During the day, I was cutting down a drooping branch from a tree above the entrance to my property. That's when I first saw him. A clown. Or a guy dressed as a clown, I should say, walking down the side of the road and stopping very slowly right at the center of the start of my driveway. He very gradually turned his head to face me, body still facing the road. I had to give him credit, his clown costume was terrifying, the mask looked horror movie status. I chuckled to myself and smiled in his direction. Judging by everyone else's experiences, I was expecting him to start bluff charging me, but he didn't. He just turned his head back to the road and kept walking. I would have said something, but I guess I just didn't care enough. That night I did my usual locking up of the shed outside and shutting off all the lights. When I got inside to start making dinner, I thought I heard something coming from outside. I opened the kitchen window a little more, but all I could hear was the wind and leaves blowing. I shut the window completely now and resumed making the food. I almost had a heart attack when there was a heavy, aggressive knocking coming from that same window I just shut. My whole body immediately went into panic mode. I felt every body part shaking, and my heart thumping twice as much than usual. I took the knife I had sitting on the counter and brought myself to look out the window, but it was literally too dark to even see past the glass. Once again, I struggled to sum up the courage to do something I felt needed to be done, which was this time to turn on the patio light and go outside. So I walked over to the back sliding glass door in my kitchen, put my finger under the light switch, afraid to flick it, waiting for a good 5 seconds, and finally did it. The horror I was afraid to experience out there came prematurely before I could even step outside. The patio light exposed the same clown from earlier, standing right outside the sliding glass door, head tilted like a dog staring at me behind the ugly mask. I could have and probably should have opened the door there and then and stabbed the guy, or at least threatened him, but it's so easy to think back and say I should have done that. Instead, I simply ran upstairs to the telephone where I called the police. I could hear banging on the heavy glass door downstairs all the way up from my bedroom, and it got worse as the clown started pounding with both hands repeatedly as opposed to the slow and steady knocking he was giving before. It got the worst when the clown started screaming like a psychotic asylum patient over the sounds of the pounding on the door. I felt like I was going to die. Literally every minute that went by that the cops hadn't arrived yet felt like 5 minutes. The screaming and banging finally came to a stop when I heard a familiar voice outside yelling, "What the hell are you doing, and get the fuck out of here." I looked out the window to see Marv, my neighbor, walking over with a rifle in his hand. When I went outside to greet and thank him, he told me the clown ran off into the woods. The cops arrived briefly after that and took down my description, did a quick 5-minute sweep of the property, and left. Marv let me crash at his place for the night just in case. We don't play with shit when it comes to our well-being and safety. So yeah, at the time I'm sharing this, that was only 3 days ago, in the midst of all this clown horror. There was this Instagram account made, and it was supposedly made by clowns who threatened to come to my school. Of course, it was taken seriously and police were called. Even the SWAT team arrived to my school. The time the clowns said they would come was around 11 a.m., so by the time 11 o'clock came around, everyone was freaking out. I, on the other hand, along with a couple other friends, knew it was probably fake and wasn't going to happen. I even heard a story where someone saw a clown at the local pool and chased a peer of mine around. I didn't believe it though. But anyways, at around 11:15, I heard the panicked voice of my vice principal come over the loudspeaker and say, "We are now going into lockdown. Please shut the doors and lock the windows." I started to get a little freaked out, but kept my cool. We all huddled in the corner of the room out of sight from the door, the normal procedure. We had to stay there for an hour and a half, just waiting in silence. The vice principal's voice eventually came back onto the intercom, and he said we were free to go home since it was the end of the day. To say the least, I was relieved. I gathered my things and started walking home. My house was about a mile away from the school, so the walk was about 20 minutes. I jammed my earbuds in about a minute into the walk. I have to walk past a couple strips of forest, which today of all days kind of freaked me out, but I didn't really let it bother me too much. About 5 minutes into my walk, I was passing the forest when I saw someone wearing very bright colors. I looked away, telling myself it's just in my head, but I looked back and saw it again. It was wearing white and yellow polka-dotted baggy pants, except its entire outfit was ripped and dirty. It was wearing a yellow button-up top kind of thing. That was all ripped and dirty as well. It had a mask on with red hair puffing out of it. Its head was tilted and it was just standing, staring at me. It started to laugh hysterically and then started running towards me. I screamed and dropped my bag and ran back to the school to find a police officer there. I told him what happened. He cursed under his breath. Him and a bunch of other police officers got in their cars to go drive over there. Truthfully, I'm not sure if the clown got caught or not, but I would sure like to hope that he did. Rumors went around school that a clown did actually walk up to the front door of the school, threatening to come in. I didn't see it, so I don't know for sure, but it's possible that this was the same clown. The police went on a manhunt for him around the area I told them about, but the clown was likely gone and hiding in the woods. That means this clown remains free to scare and terrorize more people, along with the rest. Friday night, October 7th, 2016. It's like 1 in the morning. I'm walking home from my friend's house a little buzzed. He lives almost a mile away. I stop at the T intersection of 2 roads and the trail that leads into the woods. There's no lights in there, but it's a definite shortcut that I always take during the day. Admittedly, I was wary of going in there simply because I found it creepy at night. I figured I'd save a good 10 minutes cutting through there instead of walking down the curvy roads, so I went for it. Using nothing but the light on my phone, I began to navigate the woods. The only reason going through the woods was quicker was because the roads in my neighborhood wind around a lot and you can't really just find a straight road to cut through in my house's direction. Around 50 yards into the woods, I heard noises coming from up ahead. It sounded like more people. Normally I wouldn't find this too weird. It was a Friday night though, and sometimes kids would go into the woods to smoke after all. But still, with the thought of all this clown stuff going on, especially in my area, I feared for the worst. I covered the light from my phone as I was trying to turn it off, and tiptoed around a big tree to hide. When the sounds got closer, it became obvious that they were footsteps, just as I feared. In the back of my mind, I knew the odds of running into clowns in the woods was next to none. I just also wanted to avoid contact with anyone in the woods at this hour. It soon became apparent that there were 2 people walking by. I tried to remain as quiet as possible, hoping they didn't see the light. These 2 people weren't talking at all though. I could only hear their shoes hitting the leaves on the trail. That is, hitting the leaves up until around where I was standing. Then they stopped. I got that painful feeling in my heart and stomach area that you get whenever something shocking or scary happens. I daringly stuck my head around the tree, and I could see 2 people standing there in the darkness, and I immediately recognized their bizarre attire. These were 2 clowns. It didn't feel real. I even imagined this exact scenario playing out in these woods, and here it was happening now. I knew they would have seen the light, that's why they were stopped. They knew I was hiding somewhere. The question was, what were they going to do to me? It was the most tense moment of my life. However, it only lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then I heard the 2 clowns continue walking down the trail. When they were far enough away, I hopped up and ran for the other side of the woods, not caring how much noise I made. My house was across the street from the woods, so as soon as I made it across, I was basically home. My mom was already asleep by then, so I went around back and unlocked the back door with our secret key. I made a point of locking the door right away and shutting the blinds. I walked over to the living room about to shut those blinds, when I noticed the clowns across the street, standing by the edge of the woods, facing my house. I couldn't tell if they were actually staring at me or not, but they were just still like statues, and I'm sure they were trying to scare me. I woke my mom, and she went to go check it out. But just like in any horror movie, the clowns were gone, meaning I was the only one who actually saw them. I tried to go to sleep, and given that I was still buzzed, kind of helped ease me into a sleepy state. In my bed, after facing the wall for a while, I got uncomfortable, so I flipped over to the other side, where I had a view of my whole room. Even though I was tired, I had trouble keeping my eyes closed, simply because I couldn't stop thinking about those clowns. What if they were out there right now? The curiosity was killing me to the point where I wanted to get up and look out my window. The sound of the thud on the window was like the sound of death to my ears. I knew what it was, and I didn't move. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I ignored it. Still not moving an inch. The thuds were getting more intense, and I feared they would break open the window. I finally took a look at the window, and under the blinds, the section that wasn't blocked, I saw a clown with his head to the side, looking at me laying in my bed. That was all it took for me to break down screaming, running to my mom's room and crying to her that there was a clown outside my window like a baby. She took me very seriously and took the pepper spray she had under the bed, marched over to my bedroom window, and once again, the clown was gone. My mom believed me, of course. She is my mom, after all. She didn't give me some cliched horror movie bullshit like I'm just seeing things or I had too much to drink. No, she really believed me. In fact, she called the cops the next day and reported that there were clowns in the area harassing us. But that wasn't the end of it. Last night I once again saw a clown standing across the street by the woods again, staring at my house. I still feel sick and paranoid about all of this. However, I'm planning on getting a picture or video of it the next time it happens to prove this is all true. This happened when I was 12 years old, an age old enough to be aware of my surroundings and have a pretty good sense of danger, but also still around that age that attracts a certain selection of creeps. We live in a decently busy neighborhood. However, we're on a dead-end block near a forest preserve, and across the street from us is a sump, and if you were to go through the forest preserve, you would find yourself in a small community park. There was this one Saturday night that a mini carnival was being held in the park, and since I wasn't doing anything with friends, my mom suggested that I go check out the carnival. She isn't the kind of mom who tells her kids not to go out past dark. She always let me do my own thing. So I did end up going. I crossed through the forest with a flashlight and eventually passed the fence that led to the park and saw lit up carnival rides everywhere. A Ferris wheel, a mini roller coaster, some of those big spinning rides, and of course concession stands and carnival game booths. It was late enough where it wasn't very crowded. There was also a big circus tent with the red and white stripes where I saw some people entering. I poked my head inside, where I saw 4 rows of people in the audience, and on this mini stage were 3 clowns performing tricks. One was on a tricycle, one was juggling, and the other was just dancing around. Then the dancing one noticed me poking my head inside the tent, and he skipped over closer to me and started waving his index finger, signaling for me to come closer, or to come onto the stage. I didn't really know. All I knew is I didn't want to do either, and so I walked away. I ran into a friend at one of the carnival games, and I hung out with him for about half an hour. Pretty soon the carnival was closing down, and everybody was starting to leave. I said goodbye to my friends and made my way towards the woods again. I was near the fence when I heard, "Psst." It came from behind me. It was one of the clowns. The clown that was waving me over earlier. He asked me if I wanted to check out the backstage area of the circus tent and some of the cool things the guests cannot see. I said no very quickly and walked into the forest, looking back every few seconds to make sure I wasn't being followed. And I wasn't. The clown just stood there watching me, with the painted-on smile on his face making the situation even more disturbing. When I was out of view, I began to run for a bit before I was confident he wouldn't be able to find me. I was not going to tell my mom what happened because I loved being allowed out whenever I wanted, and I feared that this might ruin that. It's a half-mile walk through the woods. I was probably 3/4 of the way there when I heard it again. Psst. This time, I immediately felt sick when I heard it. I turned and saw the same clown walking out from the darkness of the woods into the light of my flashlight. When he was close enough, I threw the flashlight at him and ran for it in the direction of my house. I heard him close behind me until the road was visible. Then I heard him turn around. When I got home, I was breathing like I had just run a marathon, and my mom was of course concerned. I still didn't want to tell her what happened, so I lied and said I jogged the whole way back. After that, it never came up again. Up until the age of 14, I always had a fear of clowns, ever since I was first greeted with one at the age of 5 at a county fair. On a cold Tuesday night in November during break, my parents were on vacation and my sister and brother were out for the night. My friend, who I'll refer to as B, wanted to come over so that we could walk to the fair a couple blocks away. So he did. We walked to the fair, which happened to be in a big empty parking lot. We walked around for a little while and played some of the carnival games. Then we ran into a clown. He didn't speak, he just smiled, bopped around, and made silly hand motions. He resembled more of a mime than a clown. And he seemed to inch his way closer to us every few seconds. Me and B laughed, B patted him on the shoulder, and we walked away. "That was weird," I told B. "That was more creepy than weird," said B. We were walking back to my house now on the sidewalks of the quiet Tuesday night neighborhood roads, and that's when we heard something from behind us. It was a pair of footsteps. We turned, but didn't see anyone. This continued for another few minutes. B said he was freaked out and was gonna go home, but I convinced him to stay with me and hang out at my place, honestly because I was scared now. We were sure we were being followed. We made it to the front of my house. I dug through my pocket, took out my keychain, and started looking for the right key out of the 3 in the dark. That's when B nudged me to turn around. There was a clown hiding in the next door neighbor's bushes, and he was staring at us. When he noticed that we had spotted him, he emerged from the bushes and started walking over to us. I began to panic, trying each of the 3 keys until the door finally opened. We entered and slammed the door behind us. I called my parents right away, who told us to arm ourselves and hide upstairs. We went up to my little brother's room and looked out the window. There was the clown standing in our driveway, looking up at the window we were standing at, as if he were waiting for us. I shut the blinds and we both ducked down. Breathing heavily and panicking, within 10 minutes, he was gone. I guess he gave up, or at least we think he was gone. For all we knew, he could have been hiding somewhere on the property all night. I'm just happy we made it home in time. If you've seen the news lately, there have been many reports of clowns luring children into the forest. I was one of the first to experience this, and it was utterly terrifying. I want to remain anonymous at the moment, just in case the clown finds out who I am. Anyways, here's what happened. I am 14 years old and live in a small town in South Carolina. The town has a population of around 130 people. Summer was just about over, and I had a summer job working at the local lumber yard. It was a great place to work. I helped customers load lumber into their vehicles, a pretty mindless job. Plus, I was able to stay physically fit because of it. The best part is that my house is exactly 1 mile away. Walking to and from work is a daily occurrence. I spent a long day hauling and moving lumber, and my workday was pretty much complete. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I started to walk home. The moon was just starting to light up the road, and the sun had completely set below the hills. There are no other houses between the lumberyard and my house. Our town is very rural. The road home has hills that peak high enough that you're unable to see what's on the other side until you crest it. The road is skinny with no shoulder, but it was freshly paved. The trees stack one by one behind each other in a row, and vegetation is thick with a few game trails coming out to the road. Crickets and frogs sound like an orchestra. The walk home usually takes about 30 minutes. I've done it so many times that I entertain myself with music. I put in my earbuds, throw on some tunes, and away I went. I was about halfway home when I heard what sounded like a high-pitched cackling laugh. What the hell was that? I said to myself out loud. I took out my earbuds and stopped. I thought maybe it was part of the music, but something about it didn't fit into the song. I stood there motionless, looking to hear the same sound again. However, the frogs croaking were so loud that not even a scream could be heard. I thought nothing of it and walked home. The next day, I started my shift at 2 p.m. I started my walk to work around 1:30. Nothing was out of the ordinary. It was a beautiful day. I usually look down at my feet and kick any rocks that I see. Having them skip across the fresh pavement was oddly satisfying. I kicked a rock and it skipped across the pavement and landed next to something strange laying in the dirt on the side of the road. It looked to be a bright red ball. I picked it up, I gave it a little pressure, and it squeaked. Immediately, I knew what it was. This is a clown nose, I said to myself. What the hell is this doing out here? I kept it and carried it to work to show the other staff members. I even put it on and gave it some honks. It got a few laughs. The day went on as usual, and around 9:30 p.m. I clocked out and began my long walk home. I forgot my earbuds at home, so I was unable to listen to my usual music. While on my way home, I was able to make out a faint image of a figure about 150 yards away of what looks like a deer standing in the middle of the road. It was hard to make out as the fog hovered over the ground and the moonlight backlit the animal. As I got within 100 yards, it must have gotten spooked. I could see a rough outline scamper back into the forest. Little did I know this was not a deer, but something more sadistic. I passed the spot in which the deer had taken off back into the woods. As I walked by, I heard footsteps about 20 yards behind me. I thought this was strange, as I have never seen a deer come back onto the road once it was scared off. Before I could look back, I heard, "Hey there." I turned my head to see a clown standing in the middle of the road with his hands behind his back. He wore baggy pants and a baggy shirt that was obviously meant to be a clown costume, but it was very dirty. So dirty that the colors faded into stains. His makeup ran down his face and his eyes were black. He tilted his head to the side and said, "You have something of mine. I need it back." He gave a small little laugh after he spoke. I don't have anything of yours, I said as I started to walk backwards. My house was still a quarter-mile away. This is when the situation went from odd to terrifying. He said, "Well then, if you don't have my nose, I'm gonna need yours." He pulled something out from behind his back, and I'm not gonna lie, it looked like a machete. I turn around, and with all my might, I take off running down the middle of the road. I could hear his bare feet running. I didn't look back as it could slow me down. The blades of what I assumed were 2 machetes dragged on the asphalt. I was in great shape, but I could still hear his footsteps getting louder, signaling he was getting closer to me. He would even let out a little giggle that would feed my adrenaline even more. My lungs started to burn. I began to crest the hill. At this moment, I could hear him almost right behind me, just about touching me. And then out of nowhere, a truck crests the hill with its headlights shining on me. I waved my arms in sheer panic. He stopped. I quickly looked behind me to see nothing. No clown. I tell the man in the truck what happened, and he called the police. I will never make that walk again. I have no idea how the clown got to that location and why he waited for me. I have never seen any vehicles parked there, nor are there any other houses besides mine for miles. This was my worst nightmare come true. Now I have found out that this is happening to more people, clowns hiding in the woods and stalking people. Is this a cult? A group of scary clowns with a goal to terrify people? I have no idea, but I do know that I'll never be able to walk in the dark or see clowns the same way again. My name is Ethan, and I'm a photographer. I took a trip last year with my wife to the Colorado mountains for an art project. My wife is also an avid skier, so she talked me into adding skiing into the trip. We had the option to book a room at a ski resort or rent out a private log cabin. The second one seemed more romantic, so I picked that one. Plus, it didn't hurt that it was cheaper. The cabin was nothing luxurious or anything. It was a single-floor, 4-room little thing. A 2-person bedroom, a small living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It may have been small, but the actual idea of being secluded in a warm log cabin during a blizzard was amazing. However, the storm was interfering with the cable signal, so we didn't have much to do this one particular evening. It was just starting to get dark out at this point, but there was still a decent amount of light outside, so I thought it would be perfect for getting a few shots and videos in the blizzard for backgrounds and wallpapers. I told my wife I'd be back within 10 minutes and slipped on my boots and coat. The moment I stepped outside and shut the door, I noticed footsteps leading up to the door in the snow that had blown under the wooden awning. I could see the prints doubled, as whoever left them there turned and went the opposite direction. I was freaked the fuck out, but I wasn't about to go inside and scare my wife. I decided to give in to my curiosity and followed the prints to the right side of the cabin. Right away, I noticed that they led to the bedroom window. My heart froze in fear when I saw this. I could see my wife sitting on the bed using her iPad. She noticed me and I waved. She laughed. I continued to follow the footprints around the cabin to the other side. They led to the living room window on the other side. Someone was stalking us, but how long ago was the question? I found myself standing there for a good minute asking myself if I should follow the footprints anymore. For whatever reason, I decided I would. They were now leading away from the cabin. I knew I was following the prints to where this person was going, not coming from, simply by the boot marks. I followed the prints away from the opening and into the trees. That was where I saw him. A man wearing a black coat facing a tree, slouched down looking at the ground. He was still as a statue, and I could see the snow piling up on his hood and shoulders. I froze in my tracks, trying not to make a sound. I would have thought to ask him if he needed help otherwise, but this guy was just standing there not doing anything, like some kind of deranged freak. I started to gradually move backwards without even turning around, making sure this man didn't turn around or notice me. When I got at a visual distance, I turned around and stomped through the snow back to the cabin. When I slammed the door shut, my wife came over to see what was wrong. I saw worry in her eyes. I guess she saw the worry in mine. She knew I saw something, and after a few minutes of harassment, I finally told her what I saw. She immediately started packing her things, telling me we're leaving right away. I told her no, we're not going anywhere. I would not get a refund for leaving early, and I wasn't about to up and leave just because some weird guy was walking around outside. She made a point of locking both locks on the door and making sure all of the windows were sealed shut. For the rest of the night, we read stuff on our iPads. I reviewed the pictures and videos I had taken so far. We turned out the lights early as there wasn't much else to do. "What if he's still out there?" I remember my wife asking me. "There's no way he's still out there," I then assured her. Listening to the wind blowing outside, along with the small flakes of snow hitting the windows, was strangely relaxing, and I knew I'd be able to fall asleep quickly. Except if it wasn't for the knock at the bedroom window. We were both still awake, and we both knew it was a knock from a person. I ushered my wife out of bed and out into the living room without turning on any lights. There was nothing to use as a weapon whatsoever. Our only option was to run before something might happen. I told my wife we'd have to forget our luggage and make a dash for the Jeep. We slipped on our boots and coats in the dark in a matter of seconds, and when we heard a knock at the living room window from the opposite side of our car, we took that opportunity to run. I pressed the unlock button, so grateful I chose to have remote locks on my Wrangler, and we hopped in. The car started with ease, and as soon as the headlights flashed on, the man was standing facing the log cabin on our side now. Not a window, just facing the wall of the cabin in the same position I had seen him in earlier, as if he were hiding his face. We drove to the nearby ski resort without much trouble in the Jeep. We stayed there for the night and went back the next day to the log cabin to collect our things we left behind. He wasn't there. When I was 17 years old and I was home alone, coincidentally on the night that I tried pot for the first time, I experienced the most horrifying moment of my life. It was mid-December, during a late fall snowstorm. I was in my room with some movie on in the background, Mrs. Doubtfire if I recall correctly, though I wasn't paying attention to it. I was trying to figure out how to properly inhale without coughing. I think I spent about half an hour breathing in smoke from that pipe, yet I couldn't even tell if I felt any different. For maybe another 10 minutes I still continued at it, and finally, I felt a little different. It was a new feeling, hard to explain at the time. I felt as if the room around me felt more calming, and I was more attentive to my surroundings, or maybe less attentive, I couldn't really tell. All I know is I felt different. I was excited, I wanted to keep going. Then suddenly I felt as if I heard a sound come from downstairs. I muted my TV and listened. It sounded like there was a tapping noise coming from the front door, like a light knocking. I got nervous that it was my parents or sister, as I didn't know if I'd be noticeably acting differently or if they would be able to pick up on the smell from around the house. I headed downstairs and looked through the peephole, not to find my parents or sister, but a severely underdressed, almost homeless-looking man. To put this into perspective, we don't live in the kind of suburbs that a lot of you most likely live in. We don't exactly live in a completely desolate area either. We have neighbors, but houses are about 200 yards apart from each other, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a decent distance. So on a dark, stormy night like this where we live, with some random dirty-looking man who I'd never seen before standing on my porch, I naturally pretended I wasn't home. I stood there and kept watching through the peephole as the guy stayed put, proceeding to knock on the door again, this time louder. I knew I wasn't going to answer, so I walked back upstairs to my room and shut the door. In a sense, I felt bad, but I would never let a stranger into my house, and I couldn't imagine what else he could have wanted other than to be let in. Time passed as I continued hitting the pipe, getting more adjusted to it and starting to really feel its effects. I felt like my mind was wandering, forgetting I was even laying in my bed, or even in my bedroom for that matter, when there was a loud thud at my window. I jumped up quicker than a mousetrap when I heard it. It sounded like a rock had hit my window. I shut off the TV now, the only source of light in the bedroom. Now it was pitch black. It took me a while to connect this with the man who was at the stoop. He was out there, I was in here, and there's nothing he could do to me, I somehow assured myself. However, being high only made me more paranoid and afraid of every little noise. In fact, I seemed to be more alert to every sound, even the small little house noises like random cracks in the walls. Nothing happened after a few minutes, and being in the pitch black darkness kind of tired me out. That, and apparently I just learned that pot puts you to sleep more effectively than sleeping pills. I awoke sometime later, thinking it must have been like 3 in the morning, but I looked at the clock, and it said it was only 1:45. I had only been asleep for like 20 minutes. I sat up thinking I heard something from down in the den. I rubbed my eyes, and then remembered the man. My heart started racing again. I was about to get up when I realized something. Across the room, there was something beyond my half-open door. I leaned in and squinted my eyes. There was somebody peering into the room at me from behind the door. I let out the most horrified and gut-wrenching scream possible as the person then emerged from the door and started walking over to my bed in the dark. I just need a warm place to stay. I had no choice but to shove him to the floor when he made it to my bed. It was then that I realized he was a very skinny and weak man. I was able to drag him up and push him to the front door with force. He tried to fight and resist, but he was too weak to do anything. He was crazy. I could see it in his eyes. I shoved him outside and locked the door, and then called the cops. I stayed downstairs where he had broken the glass to get inside, just to make sure he couldn't get back in. When the cops arrived, they found him sitting in my front bushes curled up in a ball. They took him to the station, and he was no longer my problem. So do I feel bad about this today? I guess I do a little. He was undoubtedly crazy, but I don't know how dangerous he was. It was still either way the scariest experience of my life. When I was younger, me and my friends would always have big manhunt games in the snow. This one January night when we were 13 and there was this crazy blizzard going on, we continued our tradition. We had a group of 6 people playing, 3 on each team. The game was more or less tag, but it involved hiding and running to an assigned safe point, which for us was the front stoop. It was fun in the summer, but the snow only made it so much better, what with the snow adding as a hiding and slowing down factor, hunting down footprints, and even using snowballs as weapons to slow down chasers. It was the most fun game of our childhoods. Until this particular year, things turned pretty bad. It was our turn to hide. I'll give you the names of my teammates to make things more easy to follow. Dan and Christian. Dan hopped the fence to someone's backyard on the other side of the block, which wasn't really cheating as we had no limits with this game. Christian jumped on top of my other friend's shed in the backyard and hid behind the sloped roof. I thought I'd be sneaky and started running all around the backyard to create a seemingly endless trail of footprints. When our friends from the other side of the house announced that they were coming, I had to think quickly. I did something that wasn't too pleasant. First, I signaled for Christian atop the roof to run if I were to run myself, and then I hopped in the bushes and lay flat in the snow. 2 of the others entered the backyard and started analyzing the crazy footprint path I created. I knew it would lead to me though, so I had to be ready to run if they got close. They were getting closer to the bushes I was hiding in, so Christian jumped down from the shed into the snow and darted for the front lawn. The 2 chased after him in both directions. I knew the stoop would be guarded right now, so I took this opportunity to better hide myself. I decided to follow Dan's approach and hopped onto the roof of the shed, then over the fence to that backyard on the other side of the block. I didn't see Dan anywhere though. I looked for his footprints, but quickly found some other kind of tracks in the snow. By the fence were a few boot marks from where Dan must have landed, but then quickly the marks turned to a steady trail of something being pushed,
or it dragged through the snow. I followed the trail to the back door of the pitch-black house, and then it stopped. I quickly put two and two together, and my heart sank. I turned and headed back for the fence to hop over and call for my friend's parents, but about halfway across the yard, I heard the sliding door to the house open, and someone wearing a black coat with a hood covering their face emerged and started stomping over to me. I screamed like a girl as I pulled myself up over the fence, just barely making it before he could grab my legs. All my friends came running into the backyard. Then shortly after, my friend's parents came out the back door. I told them what happened, and the mom phoned the police, while the dad stormed to the other side of the block with a gun and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so he let himself in as we watched. The door was unlocked. He had us wait outside, and within a few minutes, came out with Dan in his arms. He was knocked out. His face looked red and wounded, as if he were hit in the face by a shovel or something. There was no car in the driveway, indicating the guy left when I escaped his yard. He never returned to his house, and I'm pretty sure he's still wanted by police to this day. It just goes to show, anybody out there, even your next-door neighbor, may be a predator, just waiting for an opportunity to strike.
I'm currently a freshman in college. I came home this past week for a funeral, but let's backtrack a little. My senior year in high school, I was in the library during study hall doing some computer science work on the computer since my laptop at home didn't have JCreator on it. Anyways, this boy who was in my class sat next to me since those two computers were the only ones with JCreator. He was a really tall, very pale boy. He had long black hair that covered one of his eyes. He wore an anti-flag tee, ripped jean jacket, and Doc Martens. He never spoke to anyone in class, and I'd never seen him with anyone else. So I took a seat, and he looked up at me like I committed murder. I quickly looked away and started rummaging through my bag as a distraction. As my head was down, I heard him chuckle and then mumble, "Of course." I froze with my head still down towards my bag. I just dismissed it as him talking to his computer, as code can be quite frustrating. I sat back up and quickly typed in my login details. To break the awkwardness, I said, "She assigns too much homework, I can barely keep up." His eyes stayed locked on the computer screen. "You want the answers, don't you?" I laughed and said, "No thanks, I won't learn anything that way." Usually I would have said yes, but I didn't want to see his evil stare again. It was like he was staring into my soul. He laughed again, in that creepy laugh. So creepy that I had to close my eyes and cringe. I opened them and looked over to see him gone. The strange thing was he left his flash drive. I waited about 10 minutes to see if he would come back, but he didn't. Study hall ended at 1 and it was 12:50. I decided I would take it and give it back to him tomorrow in computer science class. I threw it in a little box above my bed. Gotta admit, it was an awesome flash drive. It was a Swiss Army knife with a flash drive in the middle. Here's the crazy part. After that, he never came to school again. He was notorious for being absent, so for the first month no one batted an eye. However, May rolled around and we were all getting ready to graduate. I had completely forgotten about the flash drive, until 2 days ago when I came home. I needed one, and I remembered I still had that boy's. I scanned it with my Norton, and it said it was all safe. I was planning to delete all of his stuff so I could put my PowerPoint for business class on it. Naturally, however, I started snooping through his files. The first thing I saw was a folder named Computer Science. I opened it, and all the answers to every assignment was there. I thought, damn, maybe that's why he left it, so I could copy off of him. Maybe because he knew he was never coming back. I went back, and the second folder was music. I kinda had to open that one to see what he listened to.
Surprisingly, not what I expected. There were only 3 songs. Running on Empty by Jackson Browne, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, and Helter Skelter by the Beatles. I went back again. There was an untitled folder. Inside it was AP Literature. There were a bunch of essays and various junk. There was one called The Best.Doc. I opened it, and it was merely a 10-page document of notebook pages filled entirely with his first and last name, handwritten. I went back again. This is where it gets weird. He had taken pictures of the emergency escape plan posters on the door in every classroom. There was a picture of a lit cigarette on the bathroom floor, and another picture of some coins on the bathroom floor with a yellow post-it note next to it saying, "Chump change" in all caps. Now this is the weird part. There was a picture of me, taken while I was reading a book in class. From the looks of it, it was my English class that he was not in. There was also a document titled, "Rest in Peace to ... but it was empty when I opened it. I still have no idea if this was a joke or not. For all I know, he never showed up again because he realized that he lost his hard drive. This story happened a few years back to me and a friend who I'll call Allie. We're now both 15, making us 12 when this story occurred. Okay, so me and Allie have been friends since 2nd grade, and we would usually spend all weekends and free time together. We always have been into paranormal and ghost stuff. We had every reason to believe that every house we ever went into was haunted. We would go on ghost hunts like the TV shows with a flip phone to record the sounds. But there will always be one night that stands out to me that still haunts me to this day. It was around midnight, and we were hyper and awake like most kids of our age on the weekends. So we decided to do another ghost hunt in my house. We got the flip phone ready, and we borrowed my dad's touchscreen to actually videotape. This was the first and last time we used that. My basement was not like most, because the house I was living in at the time was very old and therefore very old-fashioned. So down the stairs, there's one main big room that we use for storage, and a little further there was another medium-sized room for the washer and the dryer, and the farthest was a small little cell-type room that we never used, mainly because everyone was too creeped out to go in it. Me and Allie walked down the stairs, turned on the camera and flip phone recorder, and we started asking the usual questions you would see on TV, like, "Is there anybody here? Give me a sign if you're here," and that type of thing. We finally got tired of it and went back upstairs and into my room to be so excited as we reviewed our first video recording. This was a big step for us because we wanted to be ghost hunters so bad. We were watching and we kinda got disappointed as we didn't find anything in the video or voice recording. Usually we would make something up, like a footstep that wasn't ours, to make us feel less bad, but this time we were so excited about the video we didn't even want to make anything up. We couldn't sleep, so we played a few board games, and then we both agreed to review it again because maybe we missed something. And oh boy, we did. While reviewing the tape again, we both could just feel this bad energy coming from it. I guess we didn't realize it before because we were too filled with excitement. We went on anyway, and as we paid more attention, we could actually hear footsteps that weren't ours. Then what showed up on the tape, I still see when I close my eyes. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. The camera was on Allie, and behind her was this figure that looked like a distorted, almost human thing with bright white eyes that almost seemed as if they were watching you through the video. At that point we shut it off, and we were both in complete shock. We couldn't tell my father as he was asleep, being so early in the morning. We both decided to just not tell anybody and keep it our secret. Even though we never went into that basement again, we both still talk and sometimes even dream about it. To this day, I don't know if it was our imagination or if there was something with us in that basement, but I'll never go in there again. So this all happened during Halloween in 2014. My name is Max, and I'm from a small town in Findlay, Ohio. I used to go to a high school at County School about 10 minutes from where I lived called Van Buren High School. Van Buren was a nice little village with good people for the most part, but the only problem was that there were some evil creeps that could be found there if you knew where to look. The biggest hotspot for them to be found was the Van Buren State Park. Everyone knew that the state park had a little infamy to it, as it was known for some rapes and the like. Now, I've been to the park many times with friends and classmates, and nothing bad ever happened to us, so I never thought much of it. I have a lot of good memories of the place actually, like the many times when my friends and I would bike the trails and set off the works bombs in the woods or go fishing in the lake. However, fast forward to my senior year at Van Buren on the day of Halloween. My friend Ian and I saw the darker side of Van Buren State Park. The summer before my senior year, I enlisted in the Army National Guard, so it was important that I worked out and stayed in shape. So that day, I asked my best friend Ian if he wanted to go run the trails in the park with me after school, and he said he would, as he likes to work out when he can as well. It was probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I pulled into one of the parking lots, waiting for Ian to meet me there, when I saw this old silver car with a bald and just disturbing man suspiciously sitting in the lot. Knowing that creeps hang out at the parks, I glanced over to check out what he was doing when I noticed he was staring at me and would not take his eyes off of me. It was a very unsettling stare, one that made him look hungry and me uncomfortable. His eyes were wide open, and I'm pretty sure he had a frown, or maybe a grin. We made eye contact, and he nodded at me as if he were trying to say hello, but would not drop his glare. I nodded back but broke eye contact since I was pretty uncomfortable. However, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he was still staring. At this point I had enough, and I sped out of there and pulled out of the parking lot. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw he was following me. This made me floor my gas pedal, and I sped to my high school parking lot where I lost him. I called Ian and told him that I was at the high school, and that he might have to deal with this creep alone. And then my stomach sank. I got a text from Ian saying here. So I made my way back there, and sure enough, right when I pulled in, I saw Ian's car, and 2 spaces away was the scary bald guy in the silver car, still staring. I nodded to Ian for him to follow me in his car to a different parking lot at the park, and we made our way over there. We were safe, or so we thought, and got out of our cars to walk down the hill to check out the trails before we ran them. I don't really like to run with items in my pockets, so we began to walk back up the hill when we saw that old silver car circling in the lot looking for us. At the angle we were at on the hill, he must not have been able to find us, although we could see him. We waited a few minutes before walking up the hill because we figured the 2 of us, who were athletes, could take on this one guy. As we reached the top of the hill, he was gone. Feeling pretty safe, Ian and I decided to still run the trails, but I made sure to grab a rock to use as a weapon for my own peace of mind, in case we would run into the possible rapist or killer in the woods. I'll never know the man's intentions, but given that place's notoriety and his disturbing look, it couldn't have been good. Nowadays I've graduated Van Buren, and I'm an infantryman in the National Guard while attending Bowling Green State University. Sometimes when I go back home to visit, I like to go for drives at night, and sometimes I like to check the state park just to see what monsters lurk there. I'm always armed with a knife, and I'm in good shape, but it still makes me uneasy. I'm sure one of these days I might encounter something like that again. But I'm not stupid or crazy, because as soon as I do, I'm hightailing it out of there once again. So as for anyone else, make sure that if you go camping or hiking at state parks, that you are somehow armed, no self-defense, and never go alone.
In my room next to my bed is a big storage closet. It doesn't have a regular door like you would expect. It's a kind of big square door without a knob that just comes off when you grab it by the edges. So rewind to several years ago when I was 19. I remember the first time it happened. I went to sleep and woke up in the morning to find that the door had been opened and was leaning on the wooden edge of my bed. Now this wasn't the strangest thing ever, as it had happened in the past. After all, there were no hinges or anything holding the door in. I pushed the door back into the wall and got ready for school. The next night, I woke up around 4 in the morning. I could have sworn I had woken up to a noise. I sat up and looked around my room in the dark, and noticed the door was leaning on the edge of my bed again.
Now I was concerned that the edges to the hole in the wall were starting to chip away, and the door could no longer fit as tightly as it used to. I left it that way overnight and fixed it in the morning. The following night, I was having trouble sleeping. It had to be at least 2 hours of my rolling around bed trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard a huge thump, and I knew what it was. I could even see it in the dark. The door fell open again. I was so done with this. I mentally decided to just leave it open from now on. That's when I heard the slightest movement of a plastic bag from inside of the closet. My heart literally skipped a beat when I heard this. There was no draft in the room at all. I hesitantly flicked on the light switch and looked into the open closet. My biggest fear came true when I saw someone inside the closet peering at me in my bed. Within maybe half a second of my turning on the lights, he tried to hide as if I didn't see him. I couldn't even move. All I could do was scream the word "Dad." I screamed so loud it took my dad maybe 10 seconds to make it to my room. I pointed at the closet and he looked inside. Only then did I finally feel safe to get up and stand behind him. My dad crawled all the way in there, and he couldn't find anyone though. He came out and assured me I was just seeing things, and I started to question that myself. Still, I couldn't sleep in that room. I slept on the floor in my parents' room with a blanket. Well, I wouldn't say slept, as before that could even happen, I heard my bedroom door open from down the hall outside, and then someone literally ran down the stairs and out the front door, slamming it behind them. My parents heard it, and it was only then they believed me. We tried to chase whoever it was down, but he was gone. We later found out he was hiding in an empty container inside the closet.
It happened on a night that I was the designated driver among my group of friends after a party. My friends were Michael, Eddie, and Daniela. We live in the country, so anytime we wanted to go to the bars or parties, we'd have to travel long distances. That's why it's such a big deal for one of us to be sober enough to drive. We were driving down the 513, which is an unlit highway littered with the occasional house or two, but mostly forest. The road leads to town where most of the bars are. This story takes place on the way back from town. Daniela started to cry that she had to piss really bad. I told her she'd have to wait a while longer, but not gonna lie, I started to get the urge as well. That mixed with the fact that Daniela was now screaming in her drunken fit, I figured why not pull over to the side of the road and just piss somewhere in the woods. Daniela got out first and disappeared into the crops on one side. I went to the opposite side of the road and slightly into the woods just because I'm the type of person who can't have people watching me piss. I finished first and got back in the car. Eddie and Michael were singing to the roaring rap music playing on the radio, while I pretty much just sat there in silence, growing impatient. My two drunk friends didn't seem to find anything strange about the fact that Daniela had now been gone for 5 minutes, so I got back out to call her name. Michael has a much stronger voice than I, so when he screamed for her, it would be impossible for her not to hear. But still, she didn't call back. I didn't want to go in those crops, but I kind of felt like I had to since she's my friend, and I was the most aware at that moment. I forced Michael to come with since I was afraid to go in alone. Eddie stayed in the car, he was just too far gone at this point. With the flashlight from my glove box, Michael and I pushed our way through the thick, overgrown crops, walking in the only direction we could think to go, straight away from the car. Michael was calling Danielle's name while laughing his ass off. I could understand why he was finding it funny in his condition, but I just wanted to make sure she was alright and get home. Over the sounds of her own footsteps brushing crops aside and Michael's laughter, I heard something else in the near vicinity. I put my arm out to Michael's chest to halt him. Now all that could be heard was the night breeze blowing through the crops. "What is it?" Michael whispered, to which I responded, "Shh." "That." Michael called out Daniela's name again. I joined in, figuring it was just her trying to sneak up on us and scare us. And again, the footsteps stopped. So we walked a little deeper into the crops. That's when we came to a narrow clearing stretch. I don't know much about crops and farming or anything, but it seemed to be some little stretch for people to walk through. It was probably the width of 2 people, just enough to walk through. I looked to my left, as far down as the light would let me see, and then to the right. I could hear 3 footsteps, and then a couple crops pushed outward into the opening as somebody stepped into view. At first my light was only revealing their legs, so by default under the circumstances I assumed it was Michael. However, the light revealed it to be not Michael, but instead some random man who I'd never seen before. His facial features weren't clear enough to give a good description, but he didn't look friendly. I ran for it back in the only direction I remembered coming from. I guess I ran so fast that it only took me about 10 seconds to make it back to the car. Eddie was passed out in the car at this point, so I didn't bother trying to get help from him. I was honking the horn to get Michael's and hopefully Daniela's attention. The sight of that man just disturbed me. I didn't know if he owned this land or not. I continued to lay on the horn until finally, Michael came out of the crops dragging Daniela, who seemed to be out cold. I got out to help him lift her back inside of the car and plop her on the seat. Michael pointed out the gash on her forehead, as if she had been struck with a heavy, sharp object. Michael seemed to be sobering up pretty quickly due to the situation. He advised I drive to the nearest hospital, which was 10 minutes away. The drive there was not fun. It was full of panic and yelling. We brought Daniela in to have her wound treated as soon as possible. It was only then that Michael explained to the nurses, not me, that he saw some guy dragging her collapsed, unconscious body before fleeing deeper into the crops after noticing him. He never mentioned that in the car, but it made perfect sense now. That man in the crops with us that night did this. Daniela was awake after she got all stitched up, and she had no recollection of the entire night, from the moment we stepped into the party to the moment she got struck in the head. "12:17, according to the green clock shining bright from my car's dashboard. I still remember that number as I was driving home from the night shift at the pharmacy I worked at. Taking the highway at this hour is a little dangerous since there's no lights, usually no other cars at that hour, and commonly deer would walk out onto the road, and you wouldn't notice them until it'd be too late if they were in your direct path. That's why I always drive slow on it, 50 max. As the road curved to the left, a clear row of reflective lights appeared in the horizon, which I quickly realized was the reflective tape of a row of traffic cones, as well as a flashing blue light in the distance. In front of them seemed to be the reflective material on a safety vest. I was so confused trying to figure out what the hell this was about that it didn't even hit me that I should be slamming on the brakes until it was almost too late. The car came to a halting stop as the horrid screeching of my tires stopped, and the man wearing the reflective vest started walking over to my car, arms out waving. I guess he was telling me not to move the car. As the man got closer, I could see what appeared to be a police uniform under the vest. He knocked on my window with the joint of his pointer finger, so I took that as lower your window. I rolled down the window, better revealing the man's face. To give a good description, he was black, about 6 foot, skinny, slight stubble, and a left earring. He was kind of young, I'd have to guess around 25. He spoke in a very low, non-commanding voice, especially for an officer. He said, "License and registration, please." I paused for a second and asked if I did something wrong, because I definitely wasn't speeding. He paused as well and looked slightly to the left and then back at me. "Sir, this is a sobriety checkpoint," he said in once again a very non-commanding voice. I asked why he would need my ID and registration then if I had not yet been suspected of anything. He leaned back from my car and asked me to step out of the vehicle to begin the test. I opened my door and stepped out. Immediately I noticed the cop towered over me in height. He took a roll of tape out from his vest pocket and laid it down onto the ground, stretching it to a length of about 15 feet. He told me to step on the end of the roll of tape and place my arms out to my sides as I walk across the tape in a straight line. I easily did it with no issues, with the cop directly behind me the whole time, uncomfortably close. When I got to the end of the roll of tape, I could more easily see that blue flashing light. It wasn't sitting on top of a police car, it was sitting on some older, small sedan. I looked back at him and asked to see his badge, and he just looked at me with the blankest stare. It started to sink in, and I literally mean that, because I felt like my heart was sinking. This guy wasn't a cop. He said something next that I couldn't quite distinguish at first, but as he got to his car, I assumed he said, "I'll go get it 1 second." He was bent over into his car grabbing something. While he was distracted, I ran back to the car. He looked at me as I started the car and raised a gun up to me. It goes without saying, I put the pedal to the floor as the car jumped into an acceleration through the traffic cones. I saw the headlights of the guy's car go on as I was a few hundred feet away, but at that point I was already going over 60, and there was no way he'd be catching me. I got off at the next exit, and as soon as there were street lights around, I turned off my car lights to draw less attention as I finished the drive to my house. I only wish I had a dash cam at the time so I could have gotten it on video. I swear it would have wound up on the news. I was taking a drive from Maine to Upper New York to spend the week with family. I left right after work around 5:30, so I didn't anticipate getting there until past 1 in the morning. I had the top to my Jeep Wrangler off so I could enjoy the hot weather. I was somewhere in Vermont well past midnight when the gas light flicked on and the car started beeping. Unfortunately, the gas gauge in the car was broken, so there was no way to gauge how much gas was left. I was told by my brother, who drove the car the previous day, that he filled it up to the top, but clearly he was either mistaken or lying, because I had not used anywhere near a full tank's worth of gas. One of those blue service signs zoomed past. I could see a gas station symbol in one of the boxes, so I turned off that exit onto a desolate road, which surely led to some kind of civilization. I wouldn't be finding out anytime soon, however, because the car started jittering and bumping around a bit, making weird noises that didn't sound good at all. A few seconds later, the acceleration stopped, and the car came to a helpless halt. I couldn't believe it, but I actually ran out of gas. I hopped out of the car and got on the phone with AAA, telling them my exact location. They said they could have a guy out to me in at least 20 minutes. I was grateful, but at the same time annoyed that I'd be waiting now for at least 20 minutes. For about 15 minutes, I kind of just strolled around my car slowly, looking down at my phone, texting friends about the situation, and checking social medias. It was so quiet. No sounds of distant traffic, no passing cars, just the sound of crickets and other night creatures in the woods. Then, I heard something walking around in the woods. The footsteps were decently heavy, so I had a hunch it was a deer or something. But the possibility of it being a bear wasn't far-fetched, given that this was bear country. I walked around to the passenger side of the car now, where the woods were, and where the sounds were coming from, just in hopes of seeing a deer or some other harmless animal. Then, there were 2 clapping sounds. Like, it actually sounded like a person clapping their hands. I moved a little closer to listen for it again. This time it was 3 claps. I called out to the woods, hoping in some weird way that someone would answer. But after I did, the clapping didn't happen anymore. I just stood there waiting for something to happen, but it was just silence. So I got back in the car and just waited. I heard footsteps once again coming from the woods, coming in my direction. Then it just stopped. I looked outside and saw it. The head, peeking from behind a tree, just ahead. It almost looked lifeless. The eyes, they just looked so lifeless I couldn't even tell if they were looking at me or not. I was so focused on these details, I didn't even think to scream at the horror of what I was witnessing. I cranked the windows up on both sides and turned off the headlights. However, hiding in the car didn't make me feel much safer since the entire top was off. Without the headlights on, there was complete darkness. I couldn't see 2 inches in front of me, yet I was surrounded by the night noises of the forest. I was ducking down below the dashboard, doors locked yet still completely exposed to the outside, praying not to hear any sudden sounds like footsteps. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, however, as I heard someone grab the car door handle. I tried my best not to move or make any noise. I was waiting for someone to start pounding at the glass, or at the very least reach around the opening behind the front door to just unlock it. I was so exposed it wasn't even funny. And then, I felt a hand aggressively grab onto my back. I simply lost it and screamed at the top of my lungs. But suddenly the hand released its grip on my shirt as light began to fill the area, and the sound of a truck engine pulling up the road was music to my ears. I sat up and turned around to see the headlights of a AAA truck, but whoever was grabbing me was long gone already. I ran outside to greet the man who stepped out. He was a big dude in his 40s. I basically cried to him about what just happened, taking huge breaths in between each sentence. Something about his personality and presence was just calming and reassuring, however. He filled my car up with gas and we both went on our ways. Even though something about that man's aura just calmed me down, the memory of what happened that night is still haunting, and the image of that lifeless head peering around that tree is imprinted in my brain. I used to be in the Darien School District in Connecticut during my middle and high school days. It was a wealthier district, and a lot of field trips were offered to the students. I was a member of the chorus, and every year we'd take at least 1 or 2 optional field trips as a class. The year in question, in which I was a sophomore, we took a trip to Woodloch Pines Resort in Pennsylvania. The bus ride there took a few hours. I was with my friend Landon. We were going to be sharing a room. From the moment we got there, we figured it was going to be pretty dead. It was November after all, so it was cold up there. We had 3 days planned for the trip, and there were 4 chaperones. They weren't really following us at all times, we just had to tell them what activities we'd be going to do. The first day was fun. Landon and I, along with 2 girls who we were friends with, did some go-karting, rock climbing, went in the pool, and then we went to eat dinner. After dinner, we went back to our room and just hung out for a while. For the record, not all of us students were able to get rooms next to each other. The room was ground level, and there was a clear sliding door that provided a view of the lake down the hill. We went back out for a while, then came back to the room at about 10 o'clock. We left the blinds to the door open because the moon was giving off a cool reflection on the lake down below. Little did we know that would be the start of a nightmare. If I had to guess, I would say it was a whole hour of us just rolling around in both of our beds trying to get comfortable, occasionally talking, before Landon, whose bed was closer to the door, screamed. I had no idea what was going on, why he could have been screaming, or if it was a joke, until I looked at the door. It was a sight from a horror movie. There was a really tall, skinny older woman with long grayish hair standing on the other side of the door, with her hands cupped up against the glass next to her face, as if she were trying to better see into the room. The woman then walked away. Landon looked at me, I guess waiting for me to get up so he would have the confidence to get up as well and run outside after her. When we didn't see her anywhere though. The cement trail that ran past each and every room of the building was void of any people, There was nobody on the surrounding grass, nor anyone walking down the hill. We both saw the woman though, so we knew we weren't seeing things. The next day we didn't tell any of the chaperones, but we told the two girls who we were friends with. Night came once again after a long day of many activities. We entered the room through the back door and made sure to shut the blinds this time. Landon fell asleep before me. I fell asleep around half an hour after him. I woke up to silence. I couldn't tell if something had woken me up or not. All I knew is that I didn't feel right. I sat up and whispered Landon's name to see if he was awake. He didn't answer, so I turned to the left out of pure instinct and curiosity to look at him. But I couldn't see him. Something was blocking my view of the other bed. I looked up, and towering over my bed was the tall old woman. She took 2 steps back as she said, "Your back door was unlocked," before turning around and walking outside. I was frozen in that bed, except for my shaking. I woke Landon and told him what happened. We locked the back door, shut the blinds once again, and agreed to stay up the rest of the night. It was already 4 in the morning, so we wouldn't be losing much sleep. By 8 o'clock, we went to the dining hall to eat breakfast. When we got back to our room building ready to tell our chaperones, we could see the old woman through the glass of the neighboring room. She was sitting on the bed, hands folded, sitting up straight, facing the door, facing us. We ran to the front desk in the lobby building to report her to the staff instead of the chaperones. It was weird, none of them really knew what to do in the situation. Eventually, we persuaded them to come to the woman's room with us. There, they found the woman sitting in the same position, along with an older man sitting on the other bed, looking up at them as they entered. Apparently, the woman had some kind of mental disorders, but the man wasn't all there either. There was something very off-putting about him, and they just weren't the kinds of people that you'd expect to see at a family-friendly resort. The staff wouldn't kick the two out like we hoped, though, so we told our chaperones. Long story short, after a lot of arguing between chaperones and staff, we had to end the trip early, and we all went home. Me and Landon were just happy to get out of there. When I was in the 4th grade, my class took a field trip to a rural zoo-type place about an hour away from our school. I remember vividly it was a cloudy day with the occasional raindrop or two falling. The zoo was kind of small, but it was kid-friendly. It had a decent amount of habitats, mostly smaller animals though, nothing exotic. There was also a big building as part of the zoo where taxidermied animals were put on display, along with other interesting attractions that I don't really remember. Admittedly, I was kind of off in my elementary and middle school years. I would do weird antisocial things and my teachers and my mom would pick up on it. For whatever reason, when we were touring the building as a group, I decided to walk into one of the bathrooms without telling any of the teachers. I did my business, washed my hands, and entered back out into the hallway. Nobody was around. I walked down one of the hallways we hadn't crossed yet. I still vividly remember the dim, moody lighting and the scarlet red carpets of the hallways. My 8-year-old imagination was going wild as I witnessed all the stiff, lifeless animals that were once alive behind the glass boxes. I stopped in my tracks when I saw some man, obviously hiding behind a stack of chairs. I think I laughed, thinking the man was joking around. He came around from the chairs and walked over to me, asking where the group went. I said, "I don't know." He grabbed my hand and told me to follow him. I must have thought he was taking me back to the group. He led me to an exit door which led to the back section of the building by a couple of dumpsters, a few benches, and the woods. When we got outside, his tugging became a lot more aggressive, and his grip became tighter around my arm. He was pulling me into the woods. I didn't scream or cry for help, but I remember the feeling I felt in my stomach, like I was so afraid that I could throw up. and then a woman screamed at the top of her lungs. It was one of the teachers on the other side of the fence. The man let go of me and ran into the woods. Moments later, a few of the teachers ran outside the exit door to this side of the fence and pulled me back inside. The teachers all yelled at me, but at the same time comforted and smothered me. They called my parents, and the field trip was officially over. The owners of the attraction called the cops, we all got back on the buses, and we all went home. As my bus was leaving the parking lot, however, my observant 8-year-old self spotted the man crouching down in the woods near the road, hiding behind a branch, watching the buses pass. Once again, for whatever bizarre reason, I kept quiet. I was probably too shy at the time or just too shaken up to say anything. All the other kids looked at me weird the rest of the ride home. I didn't care. But I hope that man never found success in snatching an unsuspecting young child like myself at the time. Back in high school, I took a mysteries and mythology type class, or something like that. I don't remember the name of the class. It basically just had to do with real life mysteries and creepy shit. I was into that kind of stuff. I was taking the class with a good friend, who I'll call Ben for this story. The teacher of the class took us on a field trip to a nearby abandoned village with an unknown past. The village was built in the early 1900s, but seems as though it had been quickly abandoned shortly after it was built. The bus ride there was about 20 minutes. All of us were glued to the bus windows as we pulled up some sketchy-looking, decrepit road cutting through dense forest. The road eventually led to a clearing. We were there. We stepped out onto the road, which had grass growing through the cracks. The grass surrounding was almost knee-high. Then there were the buildings. The tall, archaic brick buildings with the boarded-up windows all gave off such chilling vibes. The teacher lined all 20 of us up, counted heads, and then began leading the way. The point of this little field trip was to use the so-called skills we learned in class to see if we could put anything together about why the village may have been abandoned so long ago. Some of the buildings had holes in the walls to serve as entryways. There were even holes in the ground next to some of the buildings, seemingly dug to get into the basements of some of the buildings, which seemed creepy. There was one building though. It stood taller than any of the others. It just intrigued me the most. While the teacher was leading the group towards the village church, Ben and I decided to sneak off on our own to look for anything interesting. When we walked off in the direction of the tallest building, we saw a hole in the ground. It was dug by the back door of the building, which had been sealed off. In the hole was a ladder which led down to the concrete floor below. We both looked at each other and knew we had to do it. Ben climbed down first, then me. Luckily, this was just around the time Apple started putting flashlights on their phones, so we had a source of light. It was creepy down there. There were a couple of beer bottles, one graffiti tag on the wall, and dusty wooden planks everywhere. There was a wooden stairway which led up to complete darkness, since all windows and doors had been sealed shut from above. We had already gone as far as to enter the building, so we figured we'd go up the stairs too. I went first, and with each step, the creakiness of the 100-year-old wood made me feel as if I was going to fall through each and every step. Ben followed suit. This floor of the building was very tight. It seemed like there were many openings going off into different, smaller rooms. It was so dark in there you would never even guess it was daytime. Ben and I were honestly starting to get creeped out in there and agreed to go back outside. But just then, there was a noise in one of the tiny rooms, like a big rock hitting the concrete floor. A normal instinct would be to run, but Ben and I froze, locked eyes for a moment, then both tiptoed over to the opening of the room. We shined the lights into the room and ran. We ran back down the stairs and then up the rusty ladder back outside. We caught up to the group out of breath. We didn't say anything though to avoid getting in trouble. One of our classmates asked us what was wrong. We told him we snuck into one of the buildings, and in one of the rooms, when we shined the light into it, we saw 3 guys standing maybe 10 feet away from the doorway, facing Ben and I in a weird formation, as if they were waiting for us. As we continued following the group, we paid extra attention to the tall building we entered from the distance, and before leaving, we saw a person's face at one of the higher level windows that had not been boarded up. We never told the teacher in fear of getting in trouble. We didn't know what to think. Were those just homeless people living in there? Were they gang members in hiding? Ben freaks me out with his theory. He says they were ghosts of the people who once lived in the town. Still, the way the 3 guys were just hauntingly standing there so calmly, staring at us the moment we peeked our heads through that doorway, I still can't get that image out of my head. I may go back to that village one day, just to prove Ben's idea wrong. This happened in the summer, and I believe I was about 12 at the time. I was staying in a hotel in a fairly large city with my mom and my younger brother. We were visiting other extended family, but chose not to stay in their house. My brother is younger than me by a decent amount, so I was usually told to keep an eye on him. On the day we arrived, my mom told me to do just that while she checked us in and received our room card. So, my brother and I sat down on a couch in the lobby and relaxed a little bit. While we were sitting, a man in about his mid-40s walked into the hotel. The couch was facing the hotel doors, so I got a good look at him. I remember that he was very average looking. Describing his features in detail could generate several different images. The guy comes in and sits on the couch opposite ours. I didn't think anything of it until I realized that he didn't go up to the counter first. He just came in and sat down. It made me feel a little uncomfortable. Maybe I was being a bit paranoid, but I thought he might have followed us in. Thankfully, my mom called us over and told us that our room was ready. We left the lobby and went to our room. Shortly afterwards, we left the hotel to go meet family. I forgot about the man for the rest of the day. We returned at about 7, and my mom told us that we could go swimming in the hotel pool. We all went to our room, changed, and went to the pool. A few minutes after we got into the water, the same man from before walked in and sat down. He was wearing jeans and a sweater, so he definitely wasn't going swimming. Again, we didn't think much of it until I could see that my mom was visibly worried. She pointed him out to me, and she said that if he didn't leave within 5 minutes, we needed to go back to our rooms. 5 minutes passed and he was still there, so we got our things and left. By then, it was close to 8 o'clock. We had brought a rented movie to watch, so we planned to watch that and go straight to bed. I noticed that my mom was a little on edge because of the man who had been watching us, and I got a little more worried myself too. Halfway through the movie, my mom got up to get into the shower. While she was in there, someone knocked on the door and said, "Housekeeping." I thought it was weird that the cleaning staff would come this late, but we needed another towel, so I answered the door. I wish I hadn't been so stupid. It was the same creepy man. He gave me a smile and a little wave. I just stood there, kind of motionless. My mind automatically went to the worst possible situation: kidnapping, rape, torture, etc. I heard the water in the shower turn off. He stood there as well for a moment, and then he spoke. "How was your swim?" At that moment, my mom came out of the shower, saw the man at the door, pulled me back, and slammed the door. She locked it. Then she called the front desk from our hotel phone to report the guy. I told her to just call the police, but she didn't listen. She then requested we switch rooms. I then heard footsteps stomping down the hallway away from our room. Thankfully, the guy had left. After that, we switched hotel rooms and didn't see the guy again during our stay. Have you ever gotten an uneasy feeling staying in a hotel room, especially by yourself? Likely not, and I also doubt you've ever been in a hotel room by yourself. But when I was a kid, I always got scared sleeping in hotel rooms. I would always keep looking back at the dark corners of the room every 20 seconds, thinking there would be somebody standing there. My fear not only drove me crazy, it drove my parents crazy, as I would always insist that I would sleep between them until I was around 9 or 10 years old. Anyway, eventually I had to grow up, or at least give off the impression, and started sleeping in my own bed or sharing the bed with my sister. Now I'm 24 years old, living on my own, and have to take a lot of business-related trips for my job. On one particular out-of-town trip, I was staying at a Comfort Inn in North Carolina, with all the expenses paid by my job, of course. I was in the area for a meeting with an office in a different town, and the inn was my home for the night. It was across the street from some big car dealership. That's all I remember about the surroundings. Anyway, I was off the next day, so I could look forward to just relaxing in the hotel and watching a couple movies. I was ironically watching the first Saw movie, and I swear, during the scene where Adam was hearing sounds in his apartment, my childhood paranoia started to come back for a bit, as I thought I heard little crackling type noises coming from inside the closet. Being 24, I told myself that I had to get over this nonsensical childish fear. I simply raised the volume on the movie and tried to ignore it. At the same time, I popped 2 sleeping pills into my mouth so that I'd be wiped out by the time the movie was over. Eventually, I flipped off the TV and rolled over onto my side to finally get some shut-eye. That was when the crackling noises became apparent again. It wasn't constant or anything. It was just like once every minute or so I'd hear this crackling type noise that I just can't describe coming from the closet. It wasn't happening too frequently to really bother me, and the sleeping pills were knocking me out at that point, so I was out within like 10 minutes. The next thing I remember, I awoke to the sound of cloth being rustled around. I sprang to an upright position, but it was literally too dark to even see within a few feet in front of me. After I flipped on the bedside light, there I saw somebody dressed in all black with a hood over his head, probably 6'5", 250 pounds, rummaging through my bag. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and in response, he fled the room. He had stolen my wallet and my watch, but he had also created a lasting memory that only digs deeper into a very large childhood fear of mine. I have never heard a story about anything like this on the news or anything. So for something like this to happen to a person like me, somebody who had such an odd, specific fear as a child, was simply catastrophic to me. When I was 17, I started to develop some beef with my dad, who's a huge hothead. Tensions would grow worse through the years, and it got to the point that I would commonly have to leave for the night after getting into huge fights with my dad about personal things that I won't talk about. Sometimes I would stay at a friend's house or check into a hotel. It was May 9th, 2015. I was 21 years old, and after another huge scene back at home with my dad, I had to get out of there for my own good. I checked into a nearby hotel, the Quality Inn and Suites. It was literally half a mile from my house. I'd be throwing away a little less than $100 for it, but I had nowhere else to go. It was early this time around. Usually these outbursts happen around nighttime. It was like 4 o'clock, so I decided to just hang out by the outdoor pool and clear my head. It was funny, I was the only one around in this hotel. The pool was empty, the hallways were empty, even the lobby was empty, except for, of course, the desk worker. Then again, it was only May, and it wasn't like we lived in some huge vacation destination of a town. My room was in the middle of the hall on the 2nd floor. I had no idea why they'd given me that room, since it seemed like I was one of the only few people staying in the hotel. I hung out in my room after the pool for a bit. That's when there was a very light tapping on the door. I waited for someone to yell housekeeping, but they never did. Therefore, I ignored it. And to my surprise, even though I had the do not disturb sign on the door handle, I heard the beep of the lock on the door, and then I heard the door slowly opening. I called out, no thank you, not right now. I couldn't see the employee at the door because there was a wall that blocked the view of the door from the bed. There was a pause, and I repeated myself, growing a bit curious. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. It actually startled me. I got up to actually go follow them and tell them that that was rude. When I stepped into the hall, I looked to my right. Nobody. I looked to my left, and at the end of the hall, I saw the right leg of a woman turning the left corner further down the hall before disappearing. How did she get there so fast, I wondered. I ran down to the end of the hall, and that's when I heard another door closing. When I turned the corner, nobody. Just maybe 20 closed, unoccupied hotel doors. I was so confused and honestly a bit freaked out. I went down to the front desk to complain about the rude employee. The woman at the counter said that must be Rosa. She said she would question her about slamming the door later on. I thanked the woman and then went out to eat at the nearby TGI Fridays down the road. When I got back to the room, I was on the phone talking to my mom, who said that I shouldn't come back because my dad was still super pissed. I entered my room and told her how depressed I was with all this fighting bullshit, and she understood. When I hung up, it was only 8 o'clock. I wanted the night to be over. I brushed my teeth, watched a little TV, and went to sleep at around 9 o'clock. I awoke to a noise. At first, I didn't know what it was. I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and listened.
You have to let them in.
There was somebody standing at the left edge of my bed, towering over me. I screamed and felt like throwing up at the same time. It was a dreadful, horrifying feeling. The person then grabbed around my throat and started repeating the words, "You piece of shit." It was an older woman with a weak grip. I was able to escape easily. I ran to the door of the room. I heard her following me, but she stopped at the door when I ran down the halls to the front desk. The woman at the front desk admitted that one of the employees had lost one of her master keys that had access to all of the rooms in the hotel, something they were obligated to report to the head of the hotel. I was furious. Of course, I got a refund, gave some info to the cops, and then went home that night, where my dad actually showed something close to sympathy after I explained what happened. Ever since, I've actually never had to leave the house for the night, and I hope it stays that way. Oh yeah, and I have absolutely no idea whatever became of that crazy nutcase woman that tried to kill me. I'll never forget the time my sister Danielle and I were home alone one Friday night when our parents were out. I was 12 and she was 13. We have an average-sized house, but you can hear everything going on in there. For example, you could be on the top floor and hear someone talking down in the den. We were both doing our own things in our rooms upstairs. That's when I heard it. A slight tapping coming from downstairs in the den. I soon realized it sounded like tapping on the back door. I assumed it was Danielle, so I went down to the den. It was too dark outside to see who was out there, so I flipped on the outside light. It wasn't my sister, but a random guy. He looked mid-40s, long black hair, graying a bit, red cheeks, probably 6'1". Being that this was our backyard door and some stranger was standing on the outside of it, I almost ran away. But the guy was staring at me with a kind of unintimidating look, as if he needed help. I slightly pushed the door window screen open so he could talk to me. He told me he needed to use our phone. I asked him why and why he was in our backyard. He disregarded what I had said and pleaded for me to let him in. I told him sorry and asked him to leave before I would call the cops. I tried to slide the door window back up, but he actually blocked it with his arm and began reaching into my house trying to unlock the door. When I cried for my sister, the guy pulled his arm away. I ran upstairs where I met my sister halfway. She took a peek through the den stairway to the back door and saw the guy standing there still. She called our parents. They told us to call the police and to stay upstairs. We both stayed in our rooms for a while. There was no more tapping or anything, so me being my 12-year-old self trying to be brave, I went downstairs to the den. He wasn't standing by the door anymore, but the door window was lower than when I had left it. Then I realized I didn't shut it in the first place. I walked closer to the door and then looked to my left. The door to the office was now open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier. It was too dark to see anything inside, and there was no way I was going in there. I took out my phone, opened the camera, turned on the flash, and pressed the button. As the phone took the picture, the flash from the camera provided enough light to see the guy who was standing at the door was now hunched over my office desk, and in the picture his head was turned to be facing me. I didn't know if he was running at me or not, but I felt like he was, and I ran upstairs and locked the den door. A familiar light tapping began coming from the den door now, and I could hear the man on the other side begging me to open it. I cried for my sister again and bluffed to the man, saying the cops were here. After that he stopped, and I could hear the back door open and shut. It may have been stupid to say that, as it ruined any chances of the man getting caught and arrested, but it may have also saved our lives, as the cops did not arrive for another 5 minutes. This story is told under the author's father's point of view. Me and my girlfriend's brother had been talking about hunting, and I had decided to take him on a hunting trip. It was his first time going, so I wanted to take him somewhere where I was sure he would get a deer. So I asked my uncle if we could go to his place, and he told me we could stay there for the weekend. I told him that was perfect and that we'd stay. Me and Adam got our stuff together and headed that way. It was a secluded property right smack dab in the middle of nowhere in Braxton County, West Virginia. We got to my uncle's. He had his truck started and told them to hop in. We get in, and I ask him where we're going. He told me to my hunting cabin about 10-15 miles out. When we finally made it to the cabin, it fell below our expectations. 2 rooms, very small. As soon as we unloaded our stuff, he was gone. He told us to have fun and waved goodbye from his truck. Later, when we were getting settled for the night, we realized there were no curtains or lights, just lanterns. We didn't like being so exposed, so we hung clothes over the windows. Not long after, we climbed into bed. Then within a few minutes, there was a noise outside, like metal trash cans being banged against one another. Adam started to get paranoid until I said, "It's probably just a bear or something, go back to sleep." I told Adam, "Don't wake me up unless the cabin's on fire." I went back to sleep, at least until Adam started shaking me, saying, "Cliff, wake up, there's someone outside." "No, go back to sleep, there's no..." I stopped, because on the outside wall, besides Adam's bed, a noise, almost like someone or something was raking its claws or nails all the way down the side of the cabin and stopped at the far window. The noise was followed by tapping on the window. Neither of us wanted to move the clothes to see what it was. I told Adam to load his gun, as I did myself. We stayed up all night and left in the morning. We questioned my uncle if he was playing a trick on us. He didn't have a clue what we were talking about. The author says his dad never went back to that cabin. The picture attached was taken by his uncle before he left them, and you could see the cabin in the background. I was 19 years old at the time, working at a sketchy motel. The motel was pretty run down, and the majority of people who stayed there were locals that were just doing things they weren't supposed to be doing. Let's just say the cops came by multiple times a week. I worked as both a front desk person, checking in these creeps all hours of the night, and as a housekeeper who got to clean up their nasty, vomit-smelling rooms afterwards. One afternoon, I was working as a housekeeper in the second building of the motel on the backside furthest from the office. I hated working over there because it not only had the most worn-down rooms, but it was always pretty vacant over there and way too quiet for comfort. I began cleaning one of my last rooms and wanted to get done in a hurry because it was getting late. I was washing the mirror in the room that I was cleaning when all of a sudden, I saw a man in the reflection staring at me. He was mid-50s, dirty, with long, greasy hair. Startled, I screamed, "Oh my God." I told him he scared me. The room I was currently cleaning was vacant, so there was no reason why this man should have been in there watching me clean. However, we just had a meeting on customer satisfaction, and my boss was really pressuring us to be more polite and help the guests any way we could. Sir?" I asked him cautiously. Can I get you anything? Towels?" The man just stared back at me with a crooked grin and held out his hands to me. I thought maybe he was handing me a tip for cleaning his room earlier, but when I looked down, I saw he was holding a $100 bill. Alarms started going off in my head. No one tips $100 on a $40 a night room. The man just smiled and said his name was Terry. He said he was staying in the room next door with his wife Sherry and sort of joked about their names rhyming. He smelled like car oil and alcohol. When I asked him why he was trying to hand me $100, he laughed deep in his throat and said, "Me and my wife were watching you, and we just wanted to have fun with you." I felt like my heart jumped into my throat. No, I can't do that, sir, I'm sorry." I wanted to run out of the room screaming, but he was blocking the door, my only exit. The man smiled again, taking on a softer tone of voice, and invited me to come into his room to meet his wife, just to talk as friends. I nervously told him no again, and that I had a lot of work to do for the day. I prayed to God he would just go away, and eventually he did. He grunted and walked off in what I assumed to be the direction of his room. My mind began racing. There is no wife, I thought. This man could try and kidnap me. I was 110 pounds at the time and not very strong. He could easily overpower me. I locked the room from the inside and went directly to the phone to call my manager at the front desk, but the phone wasn't working. Adrenaline began pumping through my veins, and despite what I was always told not to do, I was panicking. Did he cut the line? No, I thought. This is a crappy motel. It happens all the time. But I just have to get out. I remembered that I had my cell phone out on my housekeeping card, but that was outside the locked door. I'd have to open the door to get it. I cautiously opened the door to the room that I was cleaning and peered out. I didn't see anyone, so I frantically began searching my cart for my cell phone. I was wasting too much time looking for it, so I just decided to run as fast as I could and make a break for the front desk in the office. Then from behind me, I heard the man again, but this time he was screaming to someone else, "She's running, she's getting away." I could hear his shoes slamming against the pavement after me. I quickly turned the corner, grabbed my keycard, and let myself into a stockroom and locked the door. Within moments, I heard the sound of the dirty guy and someone else running outside, searching for me. I stayed in that stockroom for 30 minutes shaking until I could no longer hear him searching for me. I finally got the courage to run the rest of the way to the front desk. When I made it there, I collapsed into my boss's arms and he called the police. The man and whoever else was in the room with him peeled out before the cops could arrive, and I was beyond shaken up. According to the police who ran a search, this wasn't the first time he had done something like this, and he was actually wanted for sexual assault, gross sexual imposition, and in the past was once charged with rape. A few weeks later, on what happened to be my birthday, this guy was caught. A few weeks after that, I quit. I will never again work at another motel. There used to be a pond about half a mile away from my old house that I would commonly go fishing in. It was nicknamed Daryl's Pond. I still have no idea who Daryl was or why it was called that, but nobody owned it, so people would once in a blue moon go fishing there as well. It was usually me by myself though.
I had dug a pole into the ground where I would tie a noose to and from my small kayak. I'd say it was about 3 in the afternoon when I rowed out to the middle of the pond, the sweet spot for getting a decent catch. There was another person coming out from the trees. I waved at him and gave him a smile. He hopped into a small boat floating by the edge of the pond and began to row over to me. As he got close enough where trying to speak to him wouldn't come off as obnoxious, I gave him a friendly, "Perfect day, isn't it?" "Yes, absolutely," he said. He didn't say anything after that, and I started to feel a bit awkward, as if I were obligated to keep some kind of conversation rolling now. "So, you come out here to throw some lines?" I asked. "No, I don't actually fish." "Oh, well, it's never a bad day to relax on the pond," I said. He continued to row closer to me until his boat collided with mine, creating a big thud. I was genuinely uncomfortable now. I didn't feel threatened, just weirded out. I was only 24 years old. This guy looked like he was late 40s or 50s. There was an awkward silence. I tried to just act like I was focused on trying to make a catch, but by now that wasn't even on my mind. This guy was weird. I didn't know what he wanted, and I was uncomfortable being so close to him. I felt him looking at me, or at least in my direction, as I faced halfway to the opposite direction of him. I took a quick glance to my right. Yeah, he was staring at me. I decided to be ballsy and lock eye contact with him. After about 4 seconds, he looked away. "So, where are you from?" I asked him. "Up there." He pointed behind himself, in the direction of the woodsy hill leading past the dirt road. "Oh, you live by Suffolk?" I asked. No, I'm not," he said. "What made you decide to come out here?" I said. "Why not?" I continued to try and uncomfortably fill the awkward silences that kept coming up. His responses were dry. He didn't contribute anything to what was barely a conversation. He just sat there not doing anything with half a smile on his face, looking either at me or in my general direction throughout. I was creeped out. My heart was racing at this point. I'd go as far as saying that I was nervous for my life. We were surrounded by trees in all directions in the middle of the pond. I started to row a bit closer to land, but in a very low-key kind of way, trying to play it off as me just trying to find a better spot to find some fish. I was horrified when I saw he was following me. "What a great day, huh?" I felt a shake in my voice. I got close enough to the edge of the pond where I finally told the man, "I think I'm gonna call it a day." I turned to see his reaction. He was still staring at me, but his smile was gone now. "I can't let you leave," he said. He lifted his flannel to expose a handgun sticking out of his jeans pocket. As soon as I could process what I was looking at, I dove out of the boat for land, ran the whole half-mile uphill through the woods back to my house, and locked every door and window as soon as I made it home. I pulled down the blinds to the dining room window, leaving it open just a crack for peeking outside undetected. It started to get dark out, and I left every light in the house off, still peeking out to the front yard, making sure I wasn't followed. The time came when I finally decided I wasn't followed. I realize now, like you, that not calling the police immediately was a huge mistake. I kept my bedroom windows open to let the room air out. My bedroom was on the second floor, so I wasn't worried about being watched through the window. About half an hour after shutting the light and falling under the covers, I heard the sound of leaves crunching from outside. I sat up to hear it more clearly. It was definitely something walking around out there. Normally I would assume it was a deer or a bear, but after what just happened, I was still in paranoia mode. I sat up as still as a statue, except for my shaking out of fear, waiting as the sounds of the steps stopped. "Hey buddy, you up there? Are you trying to sleep? Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." I felt like 100 pounds just fell directly onto my chest. It was the same voice. I knew it right away. I didn't make a sound. I crept out of the room quietly downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed the phone, practically crawling on my way out to avoid being seen through the open blinds. I called 911 like I should have earlier in the temporary safety of my bedroom. I made sure to whisper into the phone, as I was still hoping that he hadn't yet heard or spotted me. 20 minutes felt like an hour as I sat behind my bed, waiting for the police to arrive in constant fear that I would hear glass breaking from downstairs, or a thud on the back door, or even just a voice again from down below my window outside. The police did a thorough investigation of the property in nearby woods, turning up nothing. They suggested I stay with a friend or a family member for a few days, and so I did. I never heard from or saw the man again, but I still moved a month later. I couldn't deal with the constant fear and paranoia of being watched through my windows. I feel much more comfortable fishing out by the bay now. There was this one time I joined my brother-in-law Jack on a fishing trip with him, a couple of his friends, and my sister. He came from money, so he always had an easy life, and ever since my sister married him, it's been the same for her. I packed everything I would need to spend the night on his boat in a small backpack. I drove out to the wealthier side of town by his house, which was by the bay. He lived right by the water, like it was actually in his backyard. He even had a small pre-built wooden dock leading to his luxurious boat with the name Lexi painted on, which is my sister's name. He was inspired by Forrest Gump to do that. He's living the dream life, that much I'm sure. We set sail early in the morning. He had packed tons of food and snacks, lots of hamburger meat because unsurprisingly, they had installed a barbecue onto the boat. They have always had to have everything that cost money, and it's always been infuriating. To be honest, a few hours into the trip, it wasn't even as fun as I thought it would be. Only one largemouth bass had been caught, and that was of course by Jack. They were all getting really drunk. I tried to persuade my sister to let me drink, but she kept scolding me, saying no, since I was only 17 at the time. She was always a nagging buzzkill, and at that moment, I was questioning why I even agreed to go with them. The only part of the trip I was enjoying was being able to relax and tan on the back deck of his unnecessarily large boat. The sky started to turn a beautiful orange as the sun began to set. Jack put the burgers on the grill, which to me seemed odd. 3 fish had been caught by that time, which would have been a perfect, more appropriate dinner, but I would definitely prefer burgers over fish, so I didn't complain. By the time we were done eating, it was dark out. There was something so calming yet unsettling about being in the middle of the ocean at night. It's almost like being in space. Nothing around you as far as the eye can see, and without your vessel, you'd be as good as dead. They were all insanely drunk and or high by now, blasting music and screaming and laughing. They eventually invited me to play Cards Against Humanity with them inside, so I did. I didn't have anything else to do anyway. There was an extra beer sitting on the counter by the small bar, so I just grabbed it. I was long past the point of caring now, and my sister was not in a state of mind to be nagging me anymore. About 3 beers in, I was finally able to loosen up and enjoy myself with a decent buzz. I had to lower the music a good amount earlier because I couldn't even hear myself talking. Jack and his buddies were completely shit-faced now. My sister was drunker than I'd ever seen her, but she wasn't quite as bad as them. It was fine though, they were all adults trying to have a good time, safe and secluded on a boat in calm waters, far from any land where they could cause anyone any harm. But things took a horribly unexpected turn. Over the now much lower music, me and one of Jack's friends noticed a noise coming from outside. I turned off the music completely. There was the sound of 2 men calling for help from outside. We all rushed outside, or at least I rushed, to the side of the boat. There, over the ledge, was a much smaller boat with 2 Indian men looking up at us. I asked them what the problem was. One of them told us they were out of food and gas and needed help. I looked at everyone else. I didn't feel too good about this situation, but everyone else was not even close to a correct state of mind where they should be making important decisions. I felt like I had the burden of deciding what to do. Jack told them to wait there while he went to get the ladder. He tripped on his way and dropped his bottle of beer. I figured I would hate myself if I chose not to help two stranded seagoers, so I helped Jack in carrying the ladder over to the edge and hooking it to the railing. The two men climbed up on board and thanked all of us. Jack, my sister, and their friends couldn't even speak coherent sentences to the two men, so I had to apologize and told them they had a little too much to drink. The two men didn't even seem to acknowledge my statement. They looked at Jack and asked him if we had any extra food. We led them inside to the kitchen. Jack grabbed the leftover burgers from the counter and they shoveled them down. I didn't feel right about this situation. It made me uncomfortable. Jack clumsily handed them a jerry can full of gasoline, and the two men thanked us before climbing back down the ladder. I felt better now. We all went to sleep after that. Jack and my sister got the bedroom, while me and their two friends had to sleep on the pull-out cot and couches. I was rolling around the rock-hard couch for about an hour trying to get some sleep. I eventually had to get up to get a drink and use the bathroom. Jack told us to pee into the ocean to conserve the water on the boat. I opened the door expecting nothing but the sound of the calm water splashing, but instead, I heard the faint sound of a boat motor, along with the splashing of water that would come with a sailing boat. The pitch blackness surrounding the boat prohibited me from finding the source of the sound. I hopped up top by the controls and flipped on the switch for the searchlight. The beam of light provided the perfect amount to search the surrounding waters. Nothing so far. I turned it 90 degrees. Nothing. 180 degrees. Nothing. Then I reached about 3/4 of a whole spin around, and there was the boat from before. It was coming closer. And at that exact moment, I heard the gut-wrenching, blood-curdling scream of one of the guys from below. I jumped all the way back down to deck level and ran back inside. One of Jack's friends was standing in the corner of the room, while the other was sitting up in reaction to the scream. That was followed by Jack and my sister bursting out of the bedroom to see what was going on. He formed a barely audible sentence, saying he saw two figures standing over him. They apparently ran out the front door to the deck. We all ran to see if they were still there, but they were nowhere in sight. I pointed them in the direction of where I saw the boat. The searchlight was still aimed in that exact position, but by then the boat was already gone. We never managed to find them after that. We searched high and low for what they could have stolen. All that we found was missing were a couple of cans of gasoline and Jack's wallet and keys, which he had left on the kitchen table. We had to speed all the way back to Jack's house that night. It took 4 hours to make it back, but nobody had broken in. He used the spare key hidden in the backyard to get inside. Jack and my sister had the lock changed the next day. The scary part, a few weeks ago, their camera systems caught two suspicious men wearing hoods walk up to their front door and seemingly attempt to unlock it, but failing, then quickly running off. We're 99% sure it was them. I was 21 years old and I was fishing with my 84-year-old grandfather for the first time. We took an hour-long drive from our suburban home to a more desolate part of the state. He always went fishing in this one particular lake that no one knew about, where he always managed to leave with coolers full of fish. My grandpa was a hardcore fisher, I'll say that right now. I never even knew there were different terms for the steps of fishing. He was throwing terms at me that I didn't understand left and right, even during the car ride there, which finally ended when we veered off the main quiet road and down about 2 miles of dirt trails. He parked his Jeep at the side of the trail, and from there we lugged the small boat through some dense forest. At 84 years old, my grandpa was no weakling. In fact, I was becoming exhausted from carrying the boat, but I didn't want to show him that by asking to stop for a break, because that would just be humiliating if he could lift it longer than I could. I'll skip ahead to when we were actually sitting in the boat fishing. So he just got done showing me how to actually get the line and the hook in the water. After that, he didn't say a thing. He seemed to be concentrating really hard on what he was doing. I turned around to ask him a question. He seemed to be leaning in, focusing on something in the water. He didn't respond to my question, so I just resumed concentration on the water. I turned around like 20 seconds later out of curiosity, and he was leaning even closer now. I thought something was wrong with him. I put my hand on his shoulder, and that's when I heard splashing sounds. My grandpa seemed to push something back into the water, and then yelled at the top of his lungs for me to paddle as fast as I could back in the direction we came. My heart was racing. I didn't know what happened, but I knew it was something bad. As soon as the boat hit the dirt, my grandpa was moving as fast as he could off the boat and back to the car. We left the boat and equipment behind. When we got to the car, he stepped on it down the trails. All the while I was screaming at him to answer me, to tell me what happened. He seemed to have to gather his thoughts before finally, 10 minutes into the drive, saying, "I was looking down into the water. I knew I saw something. It kept getting closer to the surface. It became clearer as it got closer, and I could swear I saw what looked like a face. And then it got even closer, and as I was leaning in to get a better look, something reached out and grabbed a hold of me." That was the most I could get out of him until a few weeks later when he tried his best to describe what he saw, and from the description he gave, I remember it sounding almost like he was describing a human face. Almost. Perhaps I remember best his single sentence. "All I know is, it wasn't no fish,